This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Well, good morning. Lewis Goodall sitting in for James O'Brien here on LBC on the 12th of February 2025. Almost Valentine's Day. You got any plans yet? Of course you haven't. We've got lots and lots of politics to get through today, and really packed show. Actually, we'll have PMQs, of course, coming up after 12 with all the latest political analysis there. Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood is making a major speech. We'll get the latest on that. We'll also be looking at an intriguing proposal. Do you fancy working a 4-day working week? I have to say, doing 2.5 jobs at the moment, I certainly quite fancy it. We'll be getting the latest on a new parliamentary bill which is causing a bit of interest within the Labour Party, and as well we'll be looking at the latest, and I don't use this word lightly, quite insane things that have emerged from the Oval Office overnight. If you know, you know. And of course, it involves Elon Musk looking a little bit like a sort of cool undertaker, if such a thing exists. We are going to talk first, though, about something that we keep seeming to come back to, and I think there's good reason for that, which is, of course, the situation on the English Channel, small boats. So many good reasons to do so. I've done loads of reporting there myself over the years on both sides of the channel. So many reasons, humanitarian reasons. We have become inured, we have become immune in what I think is quite a shocking way to the death that happens on the English Channel. It seems to happen every month or two, doesn't it? We get a flash on our phone saying 1, 2, 3, maybe a dozen people have died on a channel, often involving children, sometimes involving babies. And we just sort of act as if it's normal. I remember reporting on the day that 27 died down there. I happened to be there filming another piece at the job I was doing at the time at the BBC, and it just so happened that we happened to be on the channel that morning when the 27 died. Terrible tragedy that happened at the back end of 2021, I should say, actually. And since then, it seems that was huge news. Since then, we've just become inured to it. So the humanitarian situation is such that despite the fact that government after government, administration after administration says that they're going to shut down the evil criminal gangs, it doesn't ever seem to work, partly because, guess what? If it were that easy, someone would have done it by now, if not in Britain, then in the European Union, or who knows where else. It's like whack-a-mole. You shut down one thing, another one takes its place. But then, of course, there is the political issue around it, which is that I have no doubt at all, and I've got my own views on the importance of helping refugees and so on, but I don't think there's any doubt at all that the situation, the pictures beamed and politicised onto televisions, on radio bulletins and the rest, day after day, front pages of newspapers, has become absolutely toxic. And it has meant that immigration, which after the Brexit referendum actually diminished in public salience politically, has become paramount once again, despite the fact, as we were talking earlier in the week, that migration via the channel, i.e. irregular migration, is a very small number, a very small proportion, a drop in the ocean, if that's not an appropriate metaphor, in terms of the overall migration numbers. But it has become politically toxic, not least because it is the locus of where Nigel Farage puts much of his politics. And as again we discussed earlier in the show this week, or earlier this week, we know that basically Nigel Farage right now is the Pied Piper of British politics. The tune he plays is the tune that Kemi Badenoch and indeed even the Prime Minister Keir Starmer start to hum in short order. And so we have the latest changes announced today in that vein by the Home Office, who have been accused of quietly blocking thousands of refugees from applying for citizenship if they arrived in the UK by small boats or hidden in vehicles. Guidance for staff assessing people who have applied for naturalisation says that since Monday this week, applicants who have made a dangerous journey will normally be refused citizenship. Quote, the Refugee Council have said that the move will potentially bar some 71,000 people who have successfully applied for asylum from claiming UK citizenship. A leading immigration barrister indeed has claimed that it is a breach of international law. Previously, if you were in the country for 10 years, that would provide you with a path for citizenship. Critics, that is now changing. Critics of the bill, or critics not the bill actually, changes in the guidance, the regulations, are saying that what you are effectively doing then is permanently embedding a second-class citizenship, because you will never allow people, even if they are here for a huge, really lengthy periods, 10, 15, 20 years, you will not allow them in normal circumstances to become citizens. And therefore you are embedding them as second-class citizens and preventing them from taking up and fulfilling their obligations and duties as citizens, of doing all they could to be part of the society in which they are de facto a part. So I want to talk to you about whether you think we are getting to the point where the Labour Party, the Labour government, is starting to act like the previous Conservative government. Admittedly, they have dismantled the Rwanda scheme, which was the big Conservative idea. And as I said on the show last week, we're not talking enough. It's amazing, I think, how little scrutiny is being put on formerly Conservative ministers, asking them, well, if you were in office right now, would you still be sending people or still proposing to send people to Rwanda, despite the fact it's got involved itself in a civil war in the Democratic Republic of the Congo entirely illegally, thereby proving it is not a safe country to be. But leaving that to one side, is Labour starting to act too much like the Conservatives with regard to immigration? Or do you think this is the sort of signal that needs to be sent to the trafficking gangs, the people smugglers, who need to know there needs to be a signal that their business model cannot work? 0345 6060 973, 0345 6060 973. Do you think it is right that UK citizenship should nearly always be denied in any circumstances to anyone who arrives by small boats? Let's talk to someone who knows these matters very, very well indeed. That's Lizzie Dearden, freelance Home Affairs journalist, as I say, keeps her eye across all of these matters. Lizzie, this was unexpected.
Yes, it was. And it was especially unexpected because when we had Labour's new Borders Bill announced, a significant part of that is legally repealing some of the laws that the Conservatives brought in. And among those laws in the Illegal Migration Act 2023, people will mainly remember that for being the Rwanda law. But what was also in there was a very similar power to what we're talking about today. That law created a legal duty to refuse British citizenship to the people who qualified for removal to Rwanda. So it created this test saying that if you have arrived in the UK without leave, then we have a duty to remove you to Rwanda, and also you can never ever get citizenship. When Labour announced its new Borders Bill the other week, it said that it was repealing that, and it didn't make any mention of kind of creating the same powers in other ways. So there was quite a lot of shock when this guidance landed on Monday, and I've got to say it wasn't immediately noticed, because what it essentially does is bring back a very similar power to the law they actually repealed.
Which sort of potentially suggests that the Home Office is, let's put it as charitably as we can. I was going to say making up as we go along, but certainly, let's say, charting a kind of meandering course on this. Are they changing policy sort of by the day?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, what this guidance is actually something far wider that applies to how all citizenship applications are considered, and it's called good character. So it covers all kinds of things, including criminality and kind of behaviour in the country. So this guidance is not specifically about refugees, but the clause that has been added makes it very specific that it's targeted at refugees because it makes specific mention of small boats. And when I asked the government why it had done this, because obviously, like you mentioned, there's a lot of concerns about what impact this can have on cohesion and sort of everything that most people say they want to see from refugees once they are in the UK. The government hasn't really given a reason. All it said was there are already rules that can prevent those arriving illegally from gaining citizenship. The guidance further strengthens measures to make it clear that anyone who enters the UK illegally, including small boat arrivals, faces having a British citizenship application refused.
Do you think that the criticism that has been made by the Refugee Council, but also by some Labour MPs, we're going to be hearing from one a bit later in the show, do you think that it is fair and accurate to say that it would be creating a second-class citizenry? I mean, in a sense, I suppose you could argue, well, I mean, these people aren't citizens to begin with, so that's not entirely surprising.
Yeah, I mean, that is its literal effect in the sense that it creates a new threshold that wasn't there before. I guess the key question is why? You know, does the government have some evidence that this will prove, and I hate using this word because I feel like it was used a lot in the past, but is it a deterrent? Are they claiming that this is going to significantly deter people. I've certainly never seen any indication that at the point people are getting in small boats to cross the channel, they're thinking, oh, it's all good because in 5 years I'll definitely make a British citizenship application, and if I can't, well, I guess I'll turn straight round. I think the key question for me is why this is actually being done and what is the outcome that the government thinks it will achieve.
Well, I think that's spot on, Lizzie, because I'm always amazed at the extent to which, as part of our kind of domestic political conversation, we very seldom ever seem to reckon with actually the extent to which anybody who is coming has reckoned with the things that we are saying or the British government is saying. And the truth is, isn't it, is that, the government are talking about the importance of sending this as a signal, potentially both to the people who are coming, but also to the people, smugglers. The truth is, as much as anything, this is a signal to domestic voters, isn't it? Rather than those things. They don't really expect that any of those people will actually hear this and be deterred by it.
I think definitely ideas of British citizenship are clearly a lot more important to British people than they probably are to people arriving to seek asylum. But just quickly, the other thing I would say is I think there's potentially quite a technical legal issue here, which is that the Conservatives lost a very significant legal battle in 2021 when the Court of Appeal ruled that it wasn't illegal to arrive in the UK on a small boat to seek asylum. And the Conservatives then changed the meaning of illegal entry in law in 2022. But that law on illegal entry only applies to post-2022 arrivals. So if you arrived on a small boat before when the Nationality and Borders Act, if everyone remembers that, came in 2022, it wasn't illegal. If you arrived after, it is illegal. So there may be something extremely technical going on here, which is that someone in the Home Office has looked at the old guidance and gone, hold on, we can only apply this to people who arrived after this date, and therefore we need to add in this kind of slightly vague wording about dangerous journeys, which would enable us to apply it to people who arrived before.
And we should be clear, shouldn't we? We are talking here about people who have been granted refugee status. So it is people that the UK government has deemed worthy of an asylum application and being granted status, indefinite leave to remain or refugee status. So what they're basically doing, it's not people, to be clear to people who are listening, thinking, well, if someone's just arrived by a small boat, of course they shouldn't become a citizen. We're talking about people who have said, the British government have deemed and adjudged to be worthy of refugee status.
Yes, it's exactly that. So this specifically says that people who are recognised refugees, which is a process in itself that can often take several years, and what that actually gives you is a limited leave to remain. It's normally 5 years once you've been granted. And after 5 years as a recognised refugee, by which point you may have been in the UK 7 or 8 or 10, you can then apply for indefinite leave to remain. And I can't remember how long it is on top of that, but after a number of further years, you can apply to become a British citizen. So these aren't people who've arrived recently, and they are people who do now have the legal right to remain in the UK and have been recognised as refugees.
And what can citizenship give you that a refugee in that situation can't already have or obtain?
Well, one of the really key things is a British passport. A lot of refugees are de facto stateless in the sense that they may have fled their home country under a regime that did not grant them the right to leave. We saw that with a lot of Syrians, for example, and people who have defected from oppressive states. Often they don't have travel documents, and that makes it very difficult for them to go anywhere, let alone to kind of go abroad and exercise the normal rights of movement that we want. And also it clearly has an impact on their children and their families and all of the rights that relate to the people around them, and basically how they can live their lives.
Just finally, Lizzie, we've seen this week a lot of focus from the government on the question of what they call illegal migration itself, echoing and mirroring a term that was adopted by the Conservative government, the previous Conservative government, people who are here illegally. And we saw the kind of raids a couple of days ago that the Home Office released the pictures of. We see the government wanting to put a lot of focus on this issue. In what ways, Rwanda aside, because Rwanda obviously was a clear policy distinction and something that Starmer always said he wasn't going to do. Save Rwanda, how different would you say this government's approach is on the question of small boats, let's leave it at that, and migration, as opposed to the Conservative government?
Well, I'll say a lot of it has been a development rather than a break. One of the key differences in the early stages of the Labour government was that they were signalling that rather than going after the people who were individually arriving and seeking to punish them, that they would go after the groups organising the journeys. So the whole kind of smash the gangs rhetoric. And initially they were saying, all of our efforts are going to be on the organised criminal groups rather than punishing individuals who've been exploited by them by, for example, sending them to Rwanda. But this kind of policy sort of undermines that, because naturally a bar on British citizenship is punishing those very people, the very people who actually would have fallen in scope for Rwanda last year. And so it seems to be a deviation from what Labour's previous message has been, which is that they've been trying to portray a measure of kind of strength against small boats, but claiming to be doing it against the criminals rather than the exploited.
Lizzie Dearden there, who's a Home Affairs journalist who is very much across all of the minutiae, and it is really important in terms of the policy detail that the Home Office is doing and government policy on home affairs. And I think that is the key question. I think the key questions to try and get at here is, one is a principal question and one is a political question. The principal question is this: do you think that it should be right in all circumstances, almost all circumstances, to deny refugees the ability to get British citizenship, to become citizens like the rest of us, irrespective of how long they have been here and how much they've contributed? And secondly, a political question: what is the difference now between the Labour government and the last Conservative government on the question of small boats and irregular or illegal migration generally? And is Labour slowly, bit by bit, incrementally, basically becoming Rishi Sunak or even Nigel Farage? 0345 6060 973 0345 6060 973. Should refugees never be able to become British citizens? You're listening to Lewis Goodall sitting in for James O'Brien here on LBC. The time is 10:20.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Time is 10:22. A few of your messages, lots of messages coming in here. Asad says, Lewis, this is one of those policies I don't quite understand. If someone is applying for citizenship, they've already been recognised as a refugee by the government. So what exactly is the change supposed to accomplish? Neil says, hi, Lewis. So does this mean Labour will be opening up safe and legal routes? There's certainly no sign of that, Neil. Jack says, for many countries, illegal immigration routes do not exist. What about those people? People don't cross the channel because they think it's an easy option. And Asad says, Lewis, there's so much talk about refugees who arrived illegally, which in international law is completely illegal. What legal pathways are available? Well, Asad, the truth is that for many places, let's say that you're fleeing from Iran as a dissident, and I've interviewed Kurds, Iranian Kurds who have fled Iran. The truth is there isn't one. There isn't one. And that is a deliberate policy from the Home Office. If you're a refugee, really would like to hear from you. If you've gone through this process, maybe you're trying to apply for British citizenship at the moment or right to remain, whether you think this will make a difference to people who are currently trying to do what you have done. 0345 6060 973. Should we should we always ensure or always be the case that citizenship is not available to refugees? People who, as I say, the Home Office have adjudged have a right to be here. Derek in Northallerton has phoned up and has something to say on this. Derek.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
I don't know who the people are who wrote this law for Yvette Cooper to produce at the dispatch box about immigrants who come over by boat will not get citizenship. Then she qualifies that by saying, and this will put them off getting on the boats.
Yes.
Do these people realise these people have crossed 2 continents to get to the forests and beaches of Calais?
Yeah.
They don't buy newspaper on the way or tune into TV and listen to Parliament.
No.
They won't know what this law is or any of the laws that have been passed.
Yeah.
And certainly the people smuggling gangs aren't going to tell them as they get on the boat, oh, by the way.
No, the opposite.
Exactly. They're going to tell them England's full of jobs and benefits and you'll not have a problem.
Yeah. I once did some undercover filming, Derek, on exactly that with one of the people smugglers.
I just can't understand passing laws that these people will never read and never hear about.
Well, I suppose it depends who you think the audience is for, Derek, doesn't it? As I say, I suppose it depends whether you really, if you're serious that it's actually there to try and deter people who are trying to cross a channel, or whether you actually think it's there to get on the front cover of the various different newspapers.
Yeah, they must be able to read in about 5 different languages the countries have crossed to get here.
But Derek, isn't it fair enough? I mean, the truth is, though, we do know that this is an issue which is politically toxic. It's politically very salient.
Yeah.
We've got lots of people, lots of voters who are concerned about it, and are right to. I mean, if a state can't police its borders, then that is a security problem, if nothing else, right? You don't know who is coming in, so the government has to try and do something, don't they?
Well, the typical, you read it nationally and see on the television, the typical migrant coming across dispatches all their documents into the sea, and they arrive dockless.
Yeah.
Why not pass a law? Anybody who has no paperwork is automatically deported. Straight back to the beaches.
But the problem with that, Derek, is that A, I think in international law would not be legal, and B, the truth is, our biggest problem, of course, is if you look where the breakdown of where a lot of these people come from. You got places like Afghanistan, you got places like Yemen, you got places like Somalia, you got places like Sudan, and in many of these cases, there simply isn't a returns agreement, or much even in the way of much in terms of diplomatic relations, even between the British government and what is left or what there is of those respective places, governments in those respective places.
What's the worst can happen if England decides to break the law and send them back? If the fine is £1 million,
but the problem is, like, literally
we're paying
just
out 4 or 5 million a day to feed them.
But the problem is, literally, like physically, it's very difficult to send them back because you just don't have an agreement. You don't have a repatriations agreement. You don't have agreement with their airports. You don't have the flight. Like some of these places, their governments barely exist. Somewhere like Yemen or Afghanistan or wherever it happens to be. Like, how do you send someone back to Afghanistan? Because you literally can't even really fly them in there.
Being on the nasty side, there's plenty of nice secret beaches around the world. You can just drop them off on the beach.
Or just leave them somewhere random.
Just leave them.
What,
They're
kids?
doing it to themselves. They're coming to Calais
and
squatting on a beach.
But don't you think that those countries might sort of cotton on and wherever these secret beaches are, and I mean they could starve there.
Well, tough.
Wow, Derek. I mean,
I really am. Nobody will take the plunge and really, really get to grips. I know we need positive immigration. People with skills.
But Derek, you wouldn't care if it turned out that we'd sort of dumped them on some beach somewhere and they drowned or they'd starved, and that included like kids. They're
drowning
wouldn't
themselves
care.
now, crossing the beach, crossing the river.
But there's a big difference, isn't there, between someone taking an action and that resulting in someone drowned and themselves drowning, and the British government committing an action which is tantamount to murder or to leaving someone to ending up. I mean, would you be comfortable with that as a British citizen?
We've never tried it yet.
Well, there's probably a good reason. Well, we haven't shot the boats down in the Channel either, have we? But I mean, there's another good reason for that. We haven't sent the Navy in to sort of send torpedoes in to blow them to a million pieces. But there's a good reason we haven't done that, isn't there? And
we've never hooked a line to these boats and dragged them back to the beach.
Well, but again, it's a matter of. I mean, I think, Derek, what you seem to be describing is if you don't mind my saying so, something of a state of nature where sort of law doesn't matter and morality doesn't matter.
Of course, it matters. Good heavens above.
All
but we seem to be the tail that everybody's wagging.
Right. You're not concerned, Derek. You wouldn't be concerned if a newspaper, you woke up to a newspaper headline one day and you heard and you read that the British government had, done what you'd suggested, towed one of these boats to some secret beach, as you call them, around the world, and it turned out that, say, half a dozen people, which might have included minors or a child, had died, starved, drowned, whatever.
I'll make that decision if and when it ever happens.
Okay, Derek. Quite surprised to some extent that you need it to happen before you have a moral view about it, but there we are. We're all entitled to our opinion, I suppose. Dell is in Edinburgh. Dell.
That just made me really sad. Really sad. That someone can come and say just drop them anywhere, just not here. It's a lack of basic morality. What I actually wanted to say was this is Labour's policies being written in the Daily Mail and being broadcast by Sky and other social media platforms, and I don't think they've got a chance. I think they're right of Margaret Thatcher. That's personally what I think.
Thing is, Del, is that there's got to be a middle ground here, hasn't there? I mean, there's got to be.
Don't get me wrong. Immigration is a problem.
Yeah, between the position we were just hearing from Derek there, which is I think it's fair to say, I hope I'm correct in saying that it is still quite an extreme position with the British public. But there's got to be a middle ground which addresses people's worries. As I said, I'm the first to say, I mean, that I can totally understand, indeed I share the concern. Anybody can share the concern. There's nothing particularly liberal. There is nothing liberal at all about a state not being able to enforce its own borders and its rules, right? That basically undermines the sense of fair play and solidarity that a liberal society relies on. But there's got to be a middle ground to address this stuff, which does not include towing them to a secret beach and leaving them to starve to death.
It's having people on the ground in foreign countries again, isn't it? It's soft power. We don't have that anymore. We took the money away, like it's happening in America. This is going to happen again because of the Americans. We're going to have... Well, it's just going to happen, Lewis. It's sad times. And listening to that man saying just get them and take them somewhere else other than here just makes me really upset. It really does. And I don't know where we go from here if that's the policy that's being broadcast anywhere but what we want. A proper border control, which we can't have because they won't let us have it. It's much more beneficial to certain people in politics and in social media to have an enemy at the door. Okay? They won't do anything unless that enemy's at the door, they've got no policy. This is Nigel Farage's way he's winning, Lewis.
What do you think about the sort of central question at hand here, which the Home Office have made the changes to, which is changing the rules so that a refugee in practice is very unlikely to be able to ever become a British citizen?
I think it's my age. I just find that it really is something visceral inside me says no. Okay, this is just telling me that we have a policy that we can't control. It's being controlled by outside forces, and we're going to have to do what those outside forces are. Otherwise, they're not going to be in power in 5 years, and we'll have to go through the whole thing again, James. Immigrants are the least of us at the moment, and they are being used as that tennis ball.
Del?
And I can't do it. It just upsets me. It really does.
Del, I'm grateful to you. Fortunately, it doesn't upset me to be referred to as James O'Brien. What a thrill. What a thrill it is. I've been doing this show. It feels like I've been doing this show so long now that maybe I've become him. Who knows? We're just in a sort of weird universe. I want to talk to you if you're a refugee specifically, by the way, and you've gone through this process. We've heard of you from Derek, perhaps, which involves basically sending you to a beach and just seeing what happens. Might be good to have a response from someone who's actually been in that situation and actually can say whether these changes, these rule changes, would actually affect anyone's decision to come here. 0345 60 60 973. We're going to be talking to a Labour MP who disagrees with these changes next. But first, at 10:33, let's get the very latest LBC News headlines with Thomas Watts.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10:36. We're talking about these proposed changes the Home Office is bringing in. Well, they're not proposed. They've actually already been implemented as of Monday, which in practice makes it very difficult, if not impossible, for refugees, even if they have been given, and this is the key part, they've been given refugee status, i.e. legally they have a right to be here, recognised right to be here, they have a just cause to be here, as recognised and adjudged by the Home Office, to ever actually obtain British citizenship, talking about whether that is fair, whether that's right, whether it simply creates a problem which basically means these people, no matter how long they're here, can never actually become a full part of our society. Your views on that? I can see a lot of you disagree with what we've just heard from Derek. 0345 60 60 973. Someone who disagrees with this change is Stella Creasy, Labour MP for Walthamstow, of course. Stella Creasy, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Can you just explain why it is that you're opposed to these changes?
Well, for me, this isn't about immigration, it's about integration. These are people who we have interrogated their claim as to whether or not they are being persecuted, found they have a well-meaning fear of persecution, and therefore given them refugee status in this country. We've said that they can stay. I voted for the bill on Monday. I want to see strong border control. I want to absolutely take on the gangs. The people who we let stay here, and 2/3 of the people on those boats we do recognise have a well-founded fear of persecution, The question is what happens then? What this does is it closes off a route to citizenship. I just don't think the British public are in that space that if we have said that somebody can stay, we don't ever want to see them being part of our community. And that's where I think the challenge is on this. I genuinely think this is a counterproductive move to sending a very clear message about the importance to us of strong borders, but also upholding our obligations under the Refugee Convention. And that's why I think we really need to rethink this policy.
Is there any evidence of which you're aware that anyone would be deterred as a result of this, which is presumably part of the intent?
Well, we said under the previous government, the idea that somehow that you would deter them by not allowing people to claim asylum wasn't accurate either, because we recognise the pull factor, i.e. the fact that they are fleeing persecution. I mean, the people on the boats are coming from countries like Iran, they're coming from countries like Syria. Now, obviously, we've seen what's happened in Syria in recent months, but still people are very uncertain there. There is no evidence that this acts as a deterrent. What acts as a deterrent is smashing the gangs of people who are exploiting these vulnerable people who've been trafficked, and then also having safe routes, so having a formal way in which people can apply. There is no safe route for people from Iran. There are people on those boats, I know because I've dealt with the cases, who are the Afghan interpreters, people who put their lives on the line for our British forces, but because the previous government did not treat them well and did not come up with an appropriate scheme to be actually able to let people to come here to make their claim, have made that dangerous journey. I just think the British public would say, if you have a well-founded fear of persecution and that has been established, so we've allowed you to stay in this country, we now expect you to integrate. And part of integration is that route to citizenship.
But isn't the argument against safe routes, you'll know that this has been put forward by the Home Office many times under the previous administration, I imagine under this administration as well, given that they haven't decided to create them, is that by the creation of safe routes, they argue, simply provides more incentive for people. OK, they might not be crossing the channel, but more incentive for people to come and apply, and they want fewer people to come.
Well, this is about when we uphold our obligations. I actually think we need to do a returns deal with Europe, and indeed the French and the German ministries want to do that, so that absolutely we are processing people, we are looking at people's claims, and we are dealing with them fairly and dealing with the way that the UK can be part of that process but not be overloaded. I understand that concern. This change in policy is not about that. These people are here. The retrospective change means already there's about 70,000 people who are in this country. They have the right to stay. They are paying taxes, but they will never have the right to be able to be part of our society and to integrate in that way that citizenship offers. I just don't think the British public would think that that is the right way to approach this situation. It's to say, if you're going to stay, we want you to be able to be part of our country.
Do you think that Rwanda aside, this Labour Home Office is looking more like the Conservative Home Office it replaced?
I've seen already the difference in having a government that isn't spending millions of pounds on a silly scheme like Rwanda, but is actually getting to grip with the backlog. I have a lot of caseworkers, do a lot of people across the country, and you see the difference about tackling the backlog. So clearly they're not like the past government. I think this policy doesn't make sense in terms of the things that we want to do, in terms of getting a grip, having those strong borders, but also upholding our international obligations. Because, of course, the Refugee Convention says that you should not penalise somebody for being a refugee, and it does look like we are penalising people. One thing people may not be aware of is there's no appeals process in our citizenship scheme. So if you have your very expensive application rejected, you won't know why. If the reason is because you fled because there isn't a safe route, because you got on a boat because that was safer than being in the country that you are, I don't think the British public would think that's right. They'd want to look at somebody's character and whether they are contributing. After all, don't forget, that was Mo Farah.
Yeah, well, just finally, Stella, I mean, isn't the truth that something has to be done? You know how toxic, politically toxic this has become, that the pictures of small boats, the sense of, or the lack of order that creates is basically actually creating huge stigma and toxin around immigration generally. And the truth is, the Labour government, when it was in opposition and now, still talks about smashing the criminal gangs. Well, yeah, of course. I mean, if it were that easy, not only would the previous government have done it, but the French government would have done it, the German government would have done it, the Italian government would have done it. The truth is that is not just repeating that ad nauseum is not the answer.
And look, that's why the powers in the bill on Monday are important, because they are about a border control. Actually, Lewis, there are lots of things that the previous government didn't do because it was too busy sitting in gunboats trying to get the headlines. But we also need to be clear, the problem here isn't immigrants. The problem is politicians, and that's across the world, it's easy to blame immigrants. It's much harder to recognise the truth of the matter. Absolutely, there are organised criminal gangs. We should brook no quarrel with anybody who has any sympathy for them. We want to stop the boats. You don't stop the boats by treating people who are now in the UK and part of our communities as second-class citizens. And it's that other half that we have to get right. What happens when you are here? How do we deal with those tricky issues of integration? I have great faith in the British public. They are compassionate, decent people, and they recognise that if there are people in their community who have the right to stay, denying them a voice, which is what denying people citizenship does, isn't the British way forward. After all, we are also the nation that takes great pride in the apocryphal story of Paddington. Paddington was a stowaway from Peru and he went to have tea with the Queen. And wasn't that a beautiful British moment that everybody celebrated? So to get this right, we absolutely have to have strong border controls, but we also have to have dignity and decency. And this policy just doesn't fit in with that criteria. That's why we're calling on the government to rethink it.
Stella Creasy there, Labour MP for Walthamstow, one of the critics of these changes. Let's talk to Abdul, who is in Edgware. Are you from Afghanistan? Is that right, Abdul?
Yes, I'm from Afghanistan, Lewis. Yeah.
And what do you think about these proposed changes?
You know what, Lewis? I don't know why the government is trying to use this way to track illegal immigration, while they can. When an illegal immigrant comes to the country, they provide them with for forester services, the burden on the taxpayers, and then they provide them with a refugee status and indefinite leave to remain. At the end, they will have the full rights of being a British citizen, while they will have the indefinite leave to remain. Their children can be a British citizens. So I don't know why we are going to the very end and trying to stop them at the very end, that they will not be allowed to be in this country as a British citizen. Having an indefinite leave to remain will have the same rights as a British citizen while you are living within this country. So I don't know. These rules can be scrapped in the high courts. The lawyers will take this to the courts, and then that will be more on the public. It will cost more on the government. I don't know why they're trying to do this.
What do you think would make? Because something has to be done, doesn't it, Abdul? What do you think would make the biggest difference in preventing people from making that hazardous journey?
Lewis, they should start it from the very start. Like, for example, if someone's life is in danger in Afghanistan, they should try to make their life better there, or they should negotiate with the government over there
But in reality, our power to affect policy change in Afghanistan is quite limited.
I understand this, but on the other hand, if you see the current government policies in regards to Afghan refugees, they're refusing like 90% of Afghan refugee applications based on this, that Afghanistan is safe, you can go back to Afghanistan. Well, they know that they cannot go back to Afghanistan, and they don't recognize that government in Afghanistan, and they're trying to say that that's a terrorist government in ruling Afghanistan now. And while they know that what's happening in Afghanistan, but they still refuse these applications for Afghan refugees. I don't know why this government is trying to put pressure on the courts, like having more cases going to the courts and cost millions of extra pounds. And I don't know. I can't understand this, why they are doing this.
Okay, Abdul, grateful to you. Abdul from Edgware there, originally from Afghanistan. We're going to continue this conversation about whether you think it is right in nearly all circumstances to deny anyone who has arrived here by small boat by irregular means citizenship throughout their time in the UK. 0345 6060 973. You're listening to Lewis Goodall here on LBC. The time is almost 10:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Time is nearly 10:50. I respect Stella Creasy, but I'm not sure. I think probably embodied to some extent one of the problems that maybe more liberal politicians have, or maybe misjudging the mood of the country right now when talking about these matters in quite a romantic way. Particularly talking about things like Paddington. Not sure that necessarily chimes with the mood of the country. And I think probably vindicates the conversation that's going on in Downing Street right now by Morgan McSweeney, the Prime Minister's chief advisor, who believes, I think correctly, that the left, the Labour government, probably does need to take a more muscular position on this view, on these matters, or at least try and find a middle course between where they've been and where Farage is, because you're never going to outflank Farage on these matters, as we talked about. But it is true that people are looking for a sense of order at the border. And that's nice, that's rhymes, they could use that. Order at the border in order to try and take the toxin out of this, because it is becoming and has become toxic and indeed lethal for the people trying to cross, literally. Let's talk to Carlos, who is in Erfurt in Germany. Carlos.
Hi, I'm a refugee from Venezuela. I live in Germany, and I think we shouldn't get citizenship.
And why is that, Carlos?
And I have a couple of reasons. Because one of the reasons is that, I kept friends for people from the camps, and I see how they abuse the system and how they want to change this country into something from the country they fled from, which I think is not right. Like make LGBT rights illegal, prohibit alcohol, prohibit pork meat.
Right.
This is, and I have told them, excuse me, you came to a free country. Free means that you have to tolerate what other people like and don't like, not just what you like.
Yeah.
Because this is wrong. And I think we should also have a special tax to pay everything that we have received, the curses and stuff like that.
Do you think, Carlos...
we have to get back.
But you yourself are a refugee. What was your situation? Why did you flee Venezuela?
I'm an engineer. I was making plans from a opposition politician in Venezuela, and the government tried to kill me, so I have to flee.
Gosh.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why.
And why Germany? Why did you choose Germany?
Because I speak pretty good English, I think. I wanted to go to the UK because I have experience building, subways and railways. But because of the Brexit situation, I say, okay, maybe it's going to be trouble, so I didn't go. So I decided Germany because it was number 2 on my list.
And how welcoming have you found Germany, Carlos, as a refugee?
Super welcoming. Much more than I thought of.
And do you think you'll stay in Germany? And do you consider yourself to be fully integrated in German life? You don't desire to become a citizen?
No, I decided to become a citizen, but I will offer this. If I don't get the citizenship, but any of those people also don't get citizenship, I will accept that, because I think I shouldn't be trying to make Germany Venezuela, because there's a reason I fled from Venezuela. So this is not right.
Carlos, really grateful for your call. Really, really good to hear from a refugee directly, because we rarely do that as part of these conversations. I'm always amazed at the lack of journalists who report on this stuff, who've never, for example, really been to Calais, talked to the people there and getting a sense of actually what is going through their mind. We talk about them, of them all the time, too seldom to them. Let's talk to Gavin, who's in my home city of Birmingham. Gavin, morning.
Hi.
Good morning. What's your view on this one?
I just wanted to make the point that if someone is fleeing from their country for whatever reason, it's got to be, we would assume, detrimental to their life or their well-being, that if they've come over here and they are... One second.
Oh, dear. Oh, you're a popular man, Gavin.
Yeah. I'm at work.
Oh, well, there you go. What are you doing phoning in?
You're fine.
Get back to work.
It's fine. No, I am working. Of
course you are. Of course you are, mate. Yeah. Tell that to the boss. Go on.
I wouldn't. If they're fully integrated and they're working, they're going to Sainsbury's. They're working. I don't know, in the shop or something like that. They've got their doctors. They've, whatever it is. I don't see really for them. The main thing will be for them is to get 100% total citizenship. I don't think that's their main objective.
So you think it'll make no difference in terms of people coming?
I don't think so, no. The only thing I could really say is, in order to get a citizenship would mean, when they get citizenship, they would then get a British passport. That British passport would then maybe enable them to go back to their countries after, I don't know, a war is finished. Or
but if someone can't,
like
but just in terms of the principle, Gavin, if someone, let's say someone has been here, the current rule, or it was until Monday, was that if you'd been here for 10 years, then you would have the right to apply for citizenship. So, was that not fair enough? I mean, that's a long time. You could now be here for like 15, 20 years and not have the right to become a citizen. You could have paid taxes during that time, for much of that time after you get leave to remain. Shouldn't you have the right to apply? At least apply.
Well, you can do if you want.
No, but they can't. This is the change. You say they can't.
Oh, well, they can't. Well, again, it goes back to my first statement, is that, are they really bothered about that?
Yeah, well, certainly not in terms of... I suppose there are two slightly different questions, aren't there? One is whether it makes a difference to someone coming, which is, I think, part of the point of why they're doing it. And I think we can both agree, I don't think it would make much difference because it's so far down the line. I doubt anyone has sat in, I doubt someone sat in Calais going, oh, I really want to get to Britain. But in 10 years' time, if I get there and they allow me to stay there, I won't be able to become a citizen. Come on. Do we really think that anyone in that situation is going to have that thought process? No way. But then there's a separate question about the principle, about whether we ought to allow them to do it. And I suppose that's different.
I believe their main focus on coming here is not for a British passport.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that.
Yeah, I don't think so at all.
Grateful
even those who were blagging it.
Yeah, I agree with that, yeah. And there are some of those. Gavin, grateful to you, Gavin in Birmingham there. Richard is a little bit closer to where I am right now, as opposed to where I was born, and that is in Lambeth. Richard, you've got a view on this.
Yes. Firstly, the language used around the topic, I think, is a bit problematic. So, firstly, you keep using the word irregular to describe these migrants, and that's a very clever device by the left in this country that tries to use that term to normalise illegal migration.
Well, shall I tell you why, Richard, you raise a fair challenge, so let me just explain why I use that term as opposed to illegal, which is I'm actually using the term, you say it's from the left, no, that was the term the Home Office used to use, right? Then the last Conservative government started to talk about illegal migration, and the reason I don't echo that language, because it's political, is because the point is that, in fact, in law and international law, and as Lizzie Dearden was explaining to us at the start of the show, it is not actually possible for the UK government to make illegal the passage of these people into Britain, because if they are a genuine refugee, then they have the legal right to make that journey and be here. So that is the reason I do not say illegal, and it is not a sleight of hand on my part. It is in the name of accuracy and not echoing political language. Now go ahead.
I disagree.
Well, you can't disagree because it's a fact.
No, it's definitely a device that the left uses to try and normalise open borders and illegal migration. Anyway,
you're wrong.
The Labour MP, I'm not wrong, and you're a leftist, so you're incorrect. As per usual.
You seem like you're interested in having you seem like you're... you know what, Richard? Bye-bye. Let's talk to Samina instead. I'm not having that. It's just boring, isn't it? Someone's just phoning up to just spout a load of nonsense, be aggressive, not have a conversation. Not interested. Samina, though, I'm interested in talking to you. Samina.
Hi, Lou. So I just wanted to make the point that a lot of people voted Labour in the last election. They were still concerned about immigration, but they voted Labour because they were desperate to get out the Tories because of the systematic incompetence and dismantle of the state over the last 14 years in terms of public spending. Yeah? So at that time, Nigel Farage wasn't an MP. Now he's an MP, and he's obviously got a higher profile.
Yeah.
And Labour are thinking of 2029 and the election. And I would say to a lot of people out there who want to keep out the Tories and reform, this is going to be these conversations, and this narrative is going to get more in the public domain in the next few years, because if it isn't, then the Tories and reform will possibly through a coalition or whatever, they'll have a chance of forming a government in 2029.
Yeah, it's possible.
So I think people need to get real about this. That's all I wanted to say on the matter.
Get real, just briefly, what do you mean, get real? Samina, what do you mean?
In terms of this narrative, and people are saying, oh, well, we, as people from the left, we're more compassionate, etc.
Yeah.
But we've also got to be compassionate for the citizens.
Well, I agree with that.
Our own citizens in the UK. So there's going to be a balance.
There's got to be a balance, you're right.
I heard what Stella Creasy said, but she's going to have to, sort of form part of the party line. That's my opinion.
Samina, Nkuting, you had the last word on that, and grateful to you. And I think you're absolutely spot on that for the left, the progressive left, who I think have ignored some of these issues a bit too much, have maybe talked a bit romantically for too long about this sort of stuff, there has to align with where the public are, but have to do so in a way which nonetheless maintains their identity, doesn't just keep going or try and align with Farage. Anyway, we're moving on now because we're talking about the fact that a dozen Labour left-wing MPs are pushing ministers to introduce a 4-day working week as part of the government's overhaul of workers' rights. The backbenchers are supporting an amendment to the Employment Rights Bill, which is being spearheaded by Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister. 4-day working week. Do you fancy it? We're going to be talking to the Labour MP who's put down the amendment. That's coming up next.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Time is 11:04. Lewis Goodall sitting in for James O'Brien here on LBC. A divisive last hour in all sorts of different ways, but I think Phil from Bicester may have finally found the sentiment and the policy that can bring us all together as a nation. What we need, Phil says, is more cheesecake. Well, it's a view. Thanks, Phil. We're talking now to Peter Dowd, the Labour MP for Bootle. Before we get to him, let me just explain what he and some of his colleagues are trying to do. As I was saying before the news, dozen Labour MPs pushing ministers to introduce a 4-day working week as part of the government's overhaul of workers' rights, about which we've heard much since the government came to power. These backbenchers supporting an amendment to the Employment Rights Bill, spearheaded by the Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner, of course. This is an amendment backed currently by a dozen Labour MPs, as I say, and one Green Party MP, would commit the government to setting up a body to look into bringing in a 4-day working week across the economy. 4-day working week, they say, is the future of work. Well, let's talk to Peter Dowd now, the Labour MP for Bootle, putting forward the amendment, joining us from Parliament. Peter, thanks so much for joining us this morning. I suppose MPs already work a 4-day week in Parliament, at least, don't they? So you would just be sort of rolling it out to the rest of the country. Why do you want to do this?
Well, members of Parliament also, I know it's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek.
I know, it's a joke. It was a joke, Peter. A bit of a cheap shot.
I know it's a bit
Forgive
of a tongue-in-cheek there. So, look, the 5-day week was introduced over 100 years ago. In fact, Ford Motor Company, the ones who really initiated it and introduced it. What they found at the time, that there was more productivity, less absenteeism, better retention. And in a sense, the dial hasn't moved in terms of the working week for over 100 years. And it's time to move the dial on. And that's what this amendment is about. It's trying to get the debate going about a potential 4-day week. So this is part of that ongoing debate in relation to this particular issue.
It is true, isn't it? We'll get into the sort of practicalities of it in a moment, but it is true, actually, if we take the, you've alluded to it, Peter, but we take the sort of slightly longer view. We sort of think about the 5-day working week as a kind of almost sort of fixed part of our political life, our economic life. Of course, that never used to be the case. And it used to be a 6-day week, and indeed some of the first sort of campaigns on this by the Chartists and others were about having what we now call the weekend, although they wouldn't have called it that then.
Yes, but it's also part of the ongoing movement in terms of employment rights. You know, things like in 1938 we had the paid leave for the first time. People didn't think about why should you get paid when you're on leave. So that was a movement. The Equal Pay Act, minimum wage. So we've had this sequential and moving of the dial over the years in a whole range of employment rights for workers.
Let's talk about the practicalities of it, though, Peter. We have got, in this country, a deep productivity problem. It's one of the main drivers of our lack of growth. This is a long-standing problem. How do you think that reducing by a fifth the amount of time that workers are at work is going to help our productivity issues?
Well, over 200 companies in the UK with 5,000 workers have permanently adopted the 4-day week with no loss of pay to 32 hours. So many companies have already tested it out. I mean, there's a suggestion that there's potentially as many, there are already hundreds of thousands potentially workers doing a 4-day week. So in a sense, this is why we're having the debate. That's the whole point. Look, I don't have all the answers to the questions. What I'm trying to do is to say we have to have the debate about a 4-day week. AI is coming along, technologies are moving on, and it's time for us to have the debate about this. And what my amendment does is to try to set up a forum where we can do that.
How would you ensure that, say, for example, you're running a factory and you have to have certain commitments in terms of the output that you're producing. You're currently working a shift pattern where a 5-day working week is the norm. You can't necessarily afford, because your margins are modest or small, you can't afford to take on more staff. How can you ensure, can you be sure or can you be certain that moving to a 4-day week would work across industries like that? You can imagine how it might work with services. Can it work in industry?
Well, I suspect it can, because it's already been trialled out in a whole range of areas, whether it's the advertising and PR sector, the technology sector, ITV and software, consulting management, engineering and manufacturing. So it's already been trialled in this country and in other countries, and it has worked. And the majority of those companies that trial it out tend to stick with the 4-day week. And I'm not telling a company how it should run its business, what its hours should be. What I'm trying to say, as part of the ongoing movement, this moving the dial, is that we have to have the debate about this. That's what we've got to do. That's what I'm trying to get. So I'm not telling organisation X or company Y, they must do this, that or the other. They must organise the 32-hour week, the 4-day week in a particular way. It's trying to say to them, the debate's got to be had. It has been developed in other countries. It has been developed and moved on in companies here. So the idea that it doesn't work right across the board is not true. The evidence is there to show that.
Isn't it the truth, though, Peter, that in reality, particularly with flexible working, particularly since the pandemic where people work from home more, digital working and so on, that in many respects we have a 4-day working week across many industries, in effect, de facto, at the moment. I mean, if you go to a lot of cities on a Friday, for example, a Friday evening, you'll see that by comparison to the rest of the week, it's now some of the quietest days of the week, because particularly for service workers, not true in different industries, but certainly for service workers, which are a lot of the economy, and office workers and so on, it sort of happened by default.
Well, in a sense, we can't have it both ways. We can't have the people who are saying it won't work, and then in the next breath, some people saying, oh, well, we've already got it de facto. My point is that we've got it de facto, and I'm not disputing that. I'm not saying we have or we don't. What we've got to do is to say things have moved on. COVID showed that. Who would have thought before COVID that you would have had millions of people working from home throughout the day, weekends, etc., etc.? People would have said that was nonsense. We're not going to do that. We were forced into doing it by events. We've been forced into doing this by a whole range of reasons over the years. Why don't we just move along this voluntarily, and instead of having to be forced every time by events and circumstances into this, as happened, as you referred to, with the Charters movement, as happened with the minimum wage, as happened with paid leave? Why do we have to fight against this all the time? And a final point from me on this particular issue, we got told when the minimum wage was introduced, the economy would be bankrupt. Well, it hasn't happened, has it? And who would turn the clock back to not having a minimum wage?
What's your view generally about the status of the Workers' Rights Bill? I mean, obviously it was much hailed by the government when Angela Rayner was in opposition, said it was an absolute priority. There's been a lot of cries from business about it and about the effect it could have. Do you think it goes far enough?
Well, I think ever the way with employment rights, they work on the basis of a step-by-step approach, see how things operate, see how things work out. And I think this is a really good start. And my amendment is trying to move that on further, to have the debate. This is about having the debate. We can close the debate down, or try to close the debate down, but it won't. So why not just move on with it? Why not engage with it? And I think that's the whole point about the Employment Rights Bill as well.
Is there a danger, though, that if you were to do it, that you end up having a situation from some employers, and I don't know if you've thought about how you might mitigate against this, or if there is even a way to mitigate against it, but that you basically end up sort of shoveling 5 days worth of work into 4 days, which some people might find attractive and appealing because you get the extra day, but some people actually might find far more stressful and far more difficult, because it basically means that you're frenzied in 4 days rather than having a decent length of work over 5.
Well, it's a really valid point, and I think some of the organisations who have trialled this out have managed to do it 4 days or the 32 hours in practical terms within that 4 days, and actually it's been more productive. You've got to take it in the round. Retention's better, so you're not waiting to fill posts. Recruitment is better. People want to work for these sort of companies. Overall absenteeism goes down. So in practical terms, what you have is the ability to reach your output levels, for want of a better word, or productivity levels, and some in many cases. So this is potentially a win-win situation, but really we just need to have the debate. Let's have the debate instead of closing it down.
Peter Dowd there, the Labour MP for Bootle, has put forward this amendment. No sign from the government yet that they're particularly keen on the idea. What the Minister has said, Alex Norris, the Building Safety Minister, has said that wasn't in our manifesto. It isn't the policy for the government. We don't support that. Again, part of our plan for change is a really significant step up in employment rights, the best in a generation. That 4-day week is not part of that, but nevertheless, we're really going to deliver for workers. workers. So that's the approach we'll be taking. I want to talk to you about whether you think the idea of a 4-day working week is a good idea, about whether you agree with Peter Dowd and these other Labour MPs that actually, we've got a productivity problem, but that shows that we've got a productivity problem now under a 5-day working week, and that maybe the benefits that you get in terms of workers being able to disconnect, workers being able to spend more time with their families, workers having more flexibility over their lives, not just being tied presenteeism style to an office, is better, and it gives you something. Or maybe you are a business, maybe you've tried this or thought about it, and you're just thinking this would just be the latest example of basically British workers not wanting to work as much as they did before the pandemic, and that it would make our productivity problem even worse. If you're a business owner, interested in particular to hear from you about how you think a 4-day working week would work and whether you've tried it already. 0345 6060 973. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. If you call now, you will get through. Lewis Goodall sitting in for James O'Brien and LBC. The time is 11:15.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:17. Text here from Helen says, I love the idea of a 4-day working week, but as a self-employed sole trader, how am I supposed to be able to walk as many dogs in 4 days as 5 days? It simply isn't possible. Or am I supposed to convince my 36 different households customers to all somehow have the same day off each week? How? Great idea, but simply not feasible for many jobs. Helen, the dog walker there from Manchester. I suppose one of the ideas is to try and prevent something that I think people we know from the studies is more and more a part of the modern economy, particularly with our phones and digital life and being available not just at the office or our place of work, which is burnout, and that maybe this is a problem that it could solve. For what it's worth, I mean, it has been trialled in a few places. In 2022, there was a trial in the UK, 61 companies, 2,900 workers. And the results were pretty positive. So 39% of employees said they felt less stressed, 71% had reduced burnout, 54% found it easier to balance work and life, and 92% of the firms involved with the study continued with a 4-day week after the trial and found that their business revenues, remained stable or increased. And they found it was easier to attract and retain talent, which is quite interesting. Again, it's clear it could only perhaps work for certain industries. Maybe, but it was pretty effective in that study. How big a problem do you think burnout is? And do you think that a 4-day working week could be the way of addressing it? 0345 6060 973. Let's talk to Alex, who is Leon C. Alex, what do you want to say on this?
Good morning, Lewis.
Good morning.
Just a quick example. I totally agree with what you've just said about industry specific, and I'll tell you for why. I work in the aviation business.
Right.
Now, that's a 24/7 industry, and I'll give you an example of this further. The company I work for, I do a 7-day on, 3-day off, 7-day on, 4-day off working roster. Now, if that were applied to the business I work in, that would lead to one of two things. Either the carriers would have to employ goodness knows how many more people, or they would start laying people off.
Right.
As I've said, it's industry specific. The 4-day working week in the business I work in is simply not feasible. End of story. And aviation is totally driven by money and profit, and it's as simple as that. It's a game of bums on seats.
Alex, it's interesting you say that because it reminds me of something that I always find, and I always found this during the pandemic. Do you find that, particularly in terms of the public conversation, politics, media and so on, we often talk as if like everyone works in an office? It's like I remember during the pandemic we'd always be talking about everyone getting back to the office and how to adopt office work and everything like that.
Sure.
The truth is a big part of the population. People like to decry British manufacturing, but the truth is still about 10 to 15% of our economy. Lots of people work in factories, and we never really ever seem to talk about those people or those industries when we're talking about ideas like this.
No, I agree with you. We don't seem to recognise people that work in different situations that can't be governed by a 4-day week. And I understand what you're saying about offices. That's a slightly different kettle of fish. If you're doing a specific Monday to Friday 5-day week with your weekends off, then I'm sure that that companies would be able to accommodate a 4-day week. That's a slightly different ballgame. But when you've got an industry that is that works literally 24/7 pretty much. I mean, I spent 20 years in air traffic before I worked for the carrier that I currently work for. And that was 24/7 as well. So I am being industry specific, but I do take on board your point about the fact that we don't seem to discuss manufacturing industry workers or office workers per se, in the same vein. But as I said, I just think personally it has to be industry specific, and it's a nonsense of an idea to try and apply it to certain other businesses. You take the medical profession. Now, that's the only non-privatised industry I can think of where you've got situations where people are working some bananas hours, i.e. 60, 70 hours a week. And again, it's 24/7. A&E doesn't shut at 5 o'clock on a Friday night. It doesn't work that way.
There is a problem, though, isn't there, Alex, with burnout? And we know this from all of the studies, the sort of workplace of time series studies that we see, that burnout, and I suspect it's largely because of digital life, has become so much more intense and has become so much worse. People sort of being at work even when they're at home and all of that sort of thing. I mean, what do you think the answer to that is? And how big a problem do you think it is?
Well, it's very difficult. I mean, pressures get to us all. And I mean, I saw that in the business of air traffic control. That's extremely pressurised, and that was commonplace for guys in their 50s to retire early because of the fact that it's not that they couldn't hack it; they were extremely good and professional at their jobs. And again, I'm sorry if I sound as though it's industry specific, but it has to be in my case. But I do agree with you. There's a lot of professions that do burn out, and the medical profession's the same too. There's a lot of professions that do suffer from major burnout because of excess hours. And I mean, if you've got people working 10, 12 hours a day for six days a week, it's not conducive to productivity. It encourages sickness, and it leads to all sorts of other potential complications. So, I do agree with what you say, but in terms of combating burnout, then you could look at it that way and say, yes, a 4-day week would be appropriate. But once again, that just reinforces the point that it has to be industry specific. It can't be a generalised, right, we'll have everybody willy-nilly working a 4-day week and that's the end of it.
All right. Alex, in Leigh-on-Sea, grateful for your thoughts on that. Shai is in Elstree. Shai, your thoughts on this?
Hi, yes, thanks for taking my call.
Not at all.
Basically, we've been doing a 4-day week since late 2021.
Oh, really? And what sort of business?
It's a digital marketing agency,
right.
Based in Elstree, London. Things. To be completely honest, people talk about retention. I think that's one of the biggest things for us. But when we first started, and people missed out on this quite a lot, retention was quite weak. And one of the reasons for this is that when you move to a 4-day model, you have to squeeze in 5 days work into 4 days, which actually means that from a stress point of view,
it's worse.
Especially during the teething, the first few months while you work things out, it was a lot worse. So we did lose some staff members that we're not used to that dynamics, to the energy that's needed to produce the same amount of work. Today, it's a game changer for us. We would never go back to a 5-day week.
Really? And why is that?
It's everything that you've talked about. Retention, productivity is better. The first year, even after the teething problems we had a 7% increase in productivity. Today, it's a lot more difficult to gauge it today because obviously there's other changes that we've made, so it's not a controlled experiment.
Yes.
We're looking at around 24% increase in productivity from 2020.
Wow, really? So up by a quarter nearly?
Absolutely.
Wow.
And apart from that, it's just so nice. We've changed. I'm quite old school. Both me and my wife, who's the joint CEOs of the company, we're quite old school, and we took. I suppose it took quite a lot to convince us to go in this direction. But since we've done that, we've introduced other things like nomad policies and
what policy? Nomad policy.
Nomad. Yeah.
So you can work from anywhere.
Our staff can. We have a restriction on the hours because obviously we have clients that we need to cover. So
yes,
I think the hours at the moment are 3 hours different. So you can work anywhere within a 3 hour difference. So pretty much, most of Europe.
And Shai, do you do it? Does it work that everyone has the same day off, or do you sort of vary it for different people?
Yeah. So to begin with, we didn't. We told people to choose a day off, but now we fixed it to a Friday. So now Friday.
So you're all in at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely, all in at the same time. There are some cases, especially with the senior staff, where they do have to work those extra hours, but we then give them the hours different on another day, and they can pick and choose when they need to do that.
Right.
But vast majority of the 65 employees or 70 employees that we've got currently, they've got a long weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, which means they can go on holiday, they can go and see his family. We also work remotely, so everyone's all over the country, so it means that they can travel. It just gives you a lot more flexibility.
And why do you think, when you say, Shai, that productivity has gone up by nearly a quarter, why do you think that is? What benefits does it realise that unlocks that productivity gain?
I think one of it. Do you know that feeling when you? It's hard to explain, but you know that feeling when you go on holiday and you've got that last day and you have to squeeze in as much as you can in that last day before you go. It's exactly that, only over 4 days. So people, it's just, I can't explain it. It's really difficult to put into words, but it's just the energy that people have, the positivity. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not all. We do have difficult days and good days, but every company has that, and the good days, on a Thursday, the high on a Thursday is amazing. Everyone knows that they're going to have a long weekend. We share stories on Slack, which is like an office environment online.
Yeah.
We share stories what we've done at the weekend, and I'm quite an outgoing guy, so I like going spearfishing and free diving, and so it gives me the opportunity as a CEO to do all this stuff as well. Yeah. And I encourage everyone else to do it. And we've just done a breathing work, breath hold type work course online. So
you're all breathing. You're all breathing properly as well. Shai, everyone should come and want to work for you. Sounds perfect.
Well, we're currently looking for people, so we're happy to. We're always growing. But it is such a. I understand the last point that the person made is absolutely right. This isn't for everyone. This isn't for all environments or all industries, but I think if you are in the right industry, give it a try. Do a trial, which is what we did. We did a 3-month trial. We were very upfront with everyone. We said, look, we're going to do a 3-month trial. If it's successful, we'll change it permanently. If it's not, and it worked. It worked amazingly well. And I'd encourage everyone.
Well, there you go. Shai there in Elstree, someone CEO who's adopted the 4-day working week. He says it's worked extremely well for him in his digital marketing business. Jason is in Deptford. Jason, you've been doing a 4-day week for some time, is that right?
Yeah, hello there, mate. Yeah, I've been doing a 4-day week for nearly 18 years.
Oh wow! In what industry?
Telecommunications. I work for BT Openreach.
Okay. So that's something you sort of elect to do, and they allow you to do it that way.
Correct. Yeah, they're quite flexible. So when I first started, I was going to people's houses and fixing and installing new lines, and that was a 5-day week. And then basically it was to have a day where you could opt to do overtime. So I stopped doing that for a 5-day week, and then I opted to do a 4-day week, and then I used to volunteer on that 5th day to do overtime.
And what do you find? And so obviously it's worked for you. What do you find the benefits are of it?
You can plan your week better. I.e., if you want to go away somewhere, you can plan that, because basically we also have a something called a rolling roster. So you might be off Monday the first week, and then Tuesday the following week, and Thursday the following week, and so on. And then every once a month you get a whole long weekend where you've got Friday, Saturday, Sunday and Monday off, because you've got the Friday and the Monday either side of the weekend. So you could plan to go away then. I have something called a P&D, personal and domestic, because I have issues on a Friday for home. I'm primary carer for my children while my wife goes to work. I have the same day off every week, so I have every Friday off.
That's nice.
Because we're still working under the 36 hour.
I tell you what, as someone who does a Sunday show every week, this is all making me very jealous, I have to say. Starting to make me rethink my life choices on the radio.
Yeah, see, well, no. I mean, you only do what, 3-4 hour days?
Oh, there we go. Here we go. How dare you? How dare you? Here we go. It's all coming out now.
That. Yeah, you might have another 2 jobs. I really don't know.
No.
Yeah,
I mean,
I used
to
do work. I used to do a 3-day week, and those were 3 12-hour days.
Yeah.
But that was a long time.
That's a long. Yeah, I used to do
Thursday,
that.
Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
I used to do that as well. When I used to be a producer on Newsnight back in the day, that's exactly what you used to do. You used to do sort of 10 till 11:30, but 3 days a week. But it was funny thing about that is you basically spend you get those extra 2 days off, which is great, but you sort of spend it in a bit of a daze. You know what I mean? Like feel a bit jet lagged the entire day when you're off. So it's a sort of funny thing.
Yeah, it's not. Well, it is good. I'm a cabler now. I've been doing cabling for nearly 15 years. I work with another engineer, James, and He's on the same roster as me. We're off
Well,
on a
there you
Friday.
go. Another
If
happy
anything needs doing
customer.
overnight, we can do it on a Thursday night, and then we're off Friday to sleep.
Another happy customer there for the 4-day working week. That's Jason in Deptford there. I want your views, particularly if you're a business owner, whether you've tried this, whether you find it an idea that just frankly is unworkable, and whether you think maybe you work a 4-day working week yourself and maybe it addresses the problem of burnout. How big a problem is burnout? 0345 6060 973. Justin has text saying, "Hey Lewis, brilliant alternative to James, although I love him too. Better than Braverman." I think that's what they call damning with faint praise. Let's get the very latest news headlines now at 11:32 nearly with Thomas Watts.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Time is 11:35. Getting a lot of messages from teachers asking whether they would get a 4-day working week. I know this is going to be really controversial and teachers won't like this, but I suspect that would be a little unfair on parents, and you do get quite good holidays all in all, so maybe. I know you work hard. Teachers work really, really hard. But I suspect that probably if you were to move to a 4-day working week, chances are schools would be exempted. I suspect the NHS would be as well. A few of your texts here. Chris, we operate a 4-day week and have no problems whatsoever. In fact, it allows us to get the best talents and have a genuinely happy team. The irony is that we design workplaces for companies and it's becoming the norm, along with working from home a few days a week. Tina says, "Hi, I had a stroke in 2023. My employer allowed me flexible working. Then I applied for Mondays as a day off. I work Tuesdays to Fridays, 8:30 to 5. On a call centre from home. I get 1 hour unpaid lunch break. That means I have had no sick absence. My life is great. Only 5 hours a week loss of pay, but all in all, it helps me a lot." And Harry says, "Hi, just wanted to ask if work days would go down to a 4-day week and it affects teachers. Would that mean schools would go down to a 4-day week as well?" As I say, Harry, I suspect it probably wouldn't. I know, very, very controversial. We're going to continue that conversation. Do you think it would be a good idea if we moved to a 4-day working week? 0345 6060 973. But we're going to turn to matters in the Middle East and indeed in Washington. It feels as if, perhaps it always feels like this, or at least since the ceasefire started, but feels as if it is hanging by a slender thread. Benjamin Netanyahu has said that Israel will resume fighting in Gaza if Hamas does not release more hostages by noon on Saturday, endorsing a threat made by President Trump from the White House that could shatter the 3-week-old ceasefire between the two sides. Netanyahu's ultimatum delivered during a video address posted to social media on Tuesday: "If Hamas does not return our hostages by Saturday noon, the ceasefire will end," the Israeli Prime Minister said, "and the IDF will return to intense fighting until Hamas is finally defeated." That comes a day after Trump told reporters that let all hell break loose, quote, if the Gaza hostages aren't returned. Let's speak now to Leila Molana-Allen, special correspondent for PBS News Hour. No one knows the Middle East better than her. Leila, thanks so much for joining us on the show this morning. Do you think that the ceasefire will hold beyond Saturday?
Morning, Lewis. It really depends on whether both sides decide they want it to. This could be grandstanding. There's a lot going back and forth. What's really unclear is essentially it was Trump's idea, this idea that, well, all the hostages should be released on Saturday at noon, which he seems to think is very simple. Of course, it's taken over a year of negotiations to get to this point, and this isn't even all the hostages that are going to be released in this ceasefire deal. Initially, Netanyahu didn't really say anything about that. Now the Israeli Security Cabinet has come out and said, well, we're going to go with his plan because Hamas doesn't really seem to be responding. Essentially, what's happened with this stalemate is that Hamas initially said, look, we are going to freeze our release of the next round of hostages because Israel is not abiding by the ceasefire terms. Now, that is true. Israel has only allowed about 2/3 of the 12,000 aid trucks they were supposed to allow in. Very importantly, they are not allowing in the tents and sort of caravan-like structures, 60,000 of which they were supposed to allow in, to essentially allow people who are moving back to their homes in central and north Gaza to have somewhere to live because all the buildings are in rubble. They've been finding reasons not to allow those structures in that are being sent from Jordan and Qatar. They also haven't been allowing free movement of people across the Gaza Strip. However, they have done other things, like the IDF has pulled back from the Netzarim corridor, the central sort of line across the middle of Gaza, to allow people to cross. So some pretty important parts of this ceasefire deal are going through. They've also been releasing the Palestinian prisoners they said they would on time. Now, when the female hostages were initially released, they looked in pretty good condition. But the last 3 who were released, these men, came out in very bad condition, evidently not having eaten much, having been badly treated. And they've said there are other men chained underground in Hamas tunnels who are being starved, and that sort of created panic and protests in the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, with Israelis saying, get our hostages out now, all of them, because they're in such bad condition. So it's this sort of tit for tat back and forth. One side saying, we're not going to do this until you abide by the agreement. And the Israelis now saying, well, we want everyone out by Saturday. What isn't clear is whether Netanyahu is saying the 3 who are due to be released, or of the 17 hostages still in the deal, the 9 who are living, we know 8 are bodies, or in fact, all 76 remaining hostages, which would be a new and enormous ask that's completely not to do with the ceasefire. So really it depends now what Hamas comes back to say. All Arab governments are putting a huge amount of pressure on them to stick to the ceasefire deal. And of course, King Abdullah of Jordan met with Trump last night to try and mediate.
Leila, what effect do you think President Trump and the missives that he's sort of firing out, the things that he's saying from the Oval Office kind of night after night, is having on the situation in certainly in Gaza, the ceasefire, and also the wider Middle East as well? I mean, for example, last night, the White House keeps having to clarify what he said, but he said, I mean, absolutely astoundingly yesterday, that it wouldn't be difficult or complex to move all 2 million Gazans from Gaza and for the US to simply take ownership of it. I mean, even if you think this is never going to happen, which most people don't, what effect do you think it's having?
So here's the thing. I mean, what everyone finds so difficult to understand about President Trump is that he is a man who does not believe in the world order and the laws by which we have functioned essentially since the end of the Second World War, right? So in that way, he sort of is a good working partner for Netanyahu, who through the course of this war has also decided that he wants to throw all those things out of the way that he is orchestrating and conducting this war. So when he says things like this, it's so shocking for those of us who work in world politics and journalism, because things just don't happen that way. But for him, he's saying, look, I'm ripping up the book, I'm coming up with new ideas. And that's really my impression of what he's trying to do. It's not necessarily that he even thinks these ideas could work or that he really intends to carry them out. But what he's essentially doing is essentially sort of throwing a hand grenade into things and saying, look, I've come up with an idea. If you don't like that, come up with something better. And what is true is that over nearly a year and a half of this war, the Biden administration, supposedly a liberal administration, supposedly in support of the right of Palestinians, did absolutely nothing to stop the daily massacre of Palestinian civilians. Biden simply wasn't willing to put the pressure on Netanyahu to make a ceasefire stick. Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff walks into that room before he's even in power and says, look, he's not going to give you anything else. Sign this deal now. There will be no more concessions. And he did it. You know, an interesting aspect of this is that people in the Middle East really like President Trump. They say, look, he's a strong man. He's a man who doesn't just say things, he actually does them, unlike Biden. He's willing to do difficult things. So bizarrely, although many of the statements he's making would make life so much more difficult for many Arabs in the Middle East, they like the fact that he's quite rash and willing to sort of say things and stick with them, even if they're very unpopular. So that is kind of the reaction. And to be honest, while it might seem that his comments are blowing up so many things, in fact, the sort of steady roll of pointless statements coming out of the White House over the last year and a half, which led to no change in this war, has left Palestinians and other Arabs in the region so frustrated and furious and feeling abandoned by the last administration that this actually does seem to be fueling something, whether it's something positive or negative, at least changing something. And that's how a lot of people in the region feel. You know, at least there's somebody who's getting involved rather than just saying they will and then allowing Israel to do what it likes.
It's fascinating. Well, I suppose of the many factors that will determine what happens next, and something we don't talk about perhaps enough, is the extent to which Hamas remains popular or retains support within Gaza itself. What is your sense of how Hamas is now thought of within Gaza?
This is such a complicated issue. And look, here's the point, right? It's very easy, all this stuff, to say, oh, but do you condemn Hamas? Do you condemn Hamas? Remember, these are people who are living in an environment where they have yearly been attacked by the government that is occupying them. Now, people will say Gaza was not occupied, the Israeli pulled out in 2005, but they didn't really. They continued to control the borders, they continued to control the airspace, to control the sea space. So the reality is it was an area under siege. Now, to say that you support Hamas in Gaza does not mean that you support the murder of innocent Israelis. It for many people means that you support a government that supports the liberation of Palestinians and whatever is needed to be done to get that land to actually belong to Palestinians and be able to build a free life for the future. They don't have many other options, right? Imagine that the last time you were allowed to vote was nearly 20 years ago, right? Now, half the population of Gaza is under 18. They were not alive when Hamas was elected in that election after Israel pulled out. That's the last election that they've been allowed to have, and it's Israel that hasn't allowed Palestinians to have another election since. So half the population wasn't alive. So half the population at that time was then under 18. So less than 25% of people even voted in that election for Hamas, let alone voted for Hamas, right? So imagine even if you did vote for Hamas then, and right now you're being told that the leader you voted for 20 years ago, you are responsible for their actions. That's how people in Gaza feel. So when every day they are told that somehow by not rising up against an armed group, when they're already being killed by another armed group, of course the Israeli army, the idea that what they should be doing is rejecting the armed people that are leading the place that they're living under siege, where that they cannot leave, rather than just trying to get by in their daily lives, feed their children, and of course be very, very angry with the military force, the IDF, that is carrying out this war against them. For Palestinian people there, really boggles their mind. They say this is an unreasonable thing to even ask us. You know, your consideration of what it means to support this group, to support this political party, doesn't take into account the daily reality of our life, right? The only people currently who are there doing anything are Hamas, because of course they are running things politically as well as militarily. That does not mean that people are out in the streets baying.
I mean, Leila, but isn't it fair to say, I mean, Hamas presumably also had a role in preventing there being another election as well. It's not just the Israelis.
Well, so the issue actually with the election is not Hamas. The issue is Jerusalem. So Israel doesn't want Jerusalemites to be able to vote, because that then cements Jerusalem as a political capital for a potential Palestinian state. And the Palestinian Authority, actually, which runs the West Bank, won't go ahead with an election without allowing Jerusalemites to vote, because that essentially pushes them out of any possibility of a future state. So that's really a separate political argument. Right. It's all very, very complex, but all I'm saying is, you know, it's not as simple as saying.
As always, there's a lot of nuance here. What's your finally, Leila? What does your gut say in terms of the ceasefire? Does it hold beyond Saturday?
Oh, we pray that it does. It is such a hard-won ceasefire, and the reality of life on the ground, you know, in Gaza is so horrifying, terrifyingly cold right now. You know, hundreds of thousands of children without enough to eat, terrible diseases. You know, I mean, what they're coping with right now without bombs dropping every day is so terrible. But also, you know, the lives of these families whose hostages have been in Gaza for a year and a half. We still don't know who those 8 bodies are. They haven't identified which people. So those families still don't know whether they're getting a living person back or a dead one. This needs to come to an end. These hostages must be freed. Everyone is praying this goes forward, because, of course, all-out war once again, which is what the most extreme parties on both sides want. Of course, it's in Hamas's interest, many would say, to have this war keep going, because the reality is that then they can make Israel the enemy and not have to do things for the Gazan people themselves. So yes, we all pray it goes ahead. Really, it's going to depend on what Hamas comes back and says, whether they say, okay, let's go back to the deal, we'll release those 3 on Saturday, and whether Israel accepts that, or whether public pressure is so high to try and get them all out. But the problem is, we've seen them fight a war for a year and a half to try and get the hostages out. They haven't been able to release them that way. So it doesn't seem that that's really an effective way to push through and get these 76 hostages home.
Leila Molana-Allen there, special correspondent for PBS News Hour, giving us her assessment of whether or not that ceasefire, which everybody hopes holds in one form or another, will endure beyond noon on Saturday local time, which is when the deadline imposed by both Netanyahu and Trump has been. We'll be also catching up in the next hour of the show with other things that the president has had to say. It gets more spellbindingly, breathtakingly amazing every single day. We're also going to be, of course, as we would always on Wednesday, listening into PMQs, Prime Minister's Questions, the last one before the recess, which is taking place over the next week or so. We'll be getting Natasha Clark, our political editor's thoughts on all of that. And before then, a few more of your thoughts on the 4-day week. Do you think that is something we should be moving towards? 0345 6060 973. It is, 11:49 now. Listening to Lewis Goodall here on LBC.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Elizabeth in Kensal Green. Elizabeth.
Hello there, James.
All right, this has got to stop. This has got to stop. Right, I'm not turning up tomorrow if we keep up with this. Being trolled by James's listeners. Frankly, who knows when he's coming back? So I might just start pretending to be him at this point. Just need to get a bit sort of grouchier and have a really big, massive tea mug for myself. I mean, I don't know.
Nice enough name.
Yeah. Dear, oh dear, oh dear. Honestly, I thought his listeners were nice people. I'm not so convinced now. Go on, Elizabeth. Go on. Say what you got to say.
I'm a bus driver in London.
Right.
And I work 4 days a week.
Yeah.
And I absolutely love it. I've got my life back.
Yes.
And I can do stuff. I can do shopping. And the main thing that I wasn't able to do before is cooking, because I was always tired. I was always exhausted.
Yeah.
Having just 2 days off.
Yes.
And the way it works in the bus industry is you have to work 7 days in a row, and then you get 2 days off.
Hard work.
7 days in
Hard
a row.
work. Yeah. Oh,
yes,
gosh.
very hard.
Is that safe?
And you also, no, it shouldn't be allowed, but it is. It's totally legal to work.
Yeah.
So many days in a row, and legally you're allowed to work 13 days non-stop without a break.
Yeah. Right. Gosh.
Although you're not allowed to
exhausted
drive.
at the end of that, Elizabeth. Exhausted.
Totally. Yeah. And I did not feel as if I had 2 days off.
Yeah, I bet.
Because I was just sleeping.
You're just sort of trying to sort of catch up. Very, very difficult.
Yeah.
All right, Elizabeth in Kensal Green there. Grateful to you, although not grateful for the way you started your call. Honestly, if this becomes a thing, I'm just getting up and going. I'm saying it right now. But now you're all going to do it. So I've just totally provided totally the wrong incentive. I'm like Yvette Cooper. We're joined now by Natasha Clark, our political editor, of course.
James, so good to be with you.
Thank you, Aggie.
Right. There we go.
There we go.
You know to rub salt in the wound there.
All right. We've got Prime Minister's questions on the way.
We do, yeah.
How exciting.
I know, another thrill. But
just before recess. I hadn't even quite clocked that it was recess from tomorrow.
Recess from tomorrow. And it feels like
4-day working week.
Exactly, 4-day week in Westminster.
Yeah, of course.
They clocked off at 4 p.m. yesterday as well, honestly.
Dear.
This government. But look, lots of things I'm sure that will crop up at PMQs today. If you're Keir Starmer, you're going to want to talk about the Heathrow decision, a huge investment in British Steel, thousands of homes being built, including more money for affordable housing. That's what the government wants to talk about today. What you don't want to talk about is reports from Bloomberg today that Rachel Reeves could be breaking her fiscal rules, which puts her up for a bit of a fight with the OBR later next month when she comes to deliver her spring statement. You also don't want to talk about those WhatsApp groups, which of course forced one minister to resign over the weekend. 2 suspended MPs and 11 Labour councillors have been suspended. You don't want Kemi Badenoch, which I'm sure she will, to make a joke about Sue Gray going into the House of Lords, which she did yesterday. And you definitely don't.
Kemi should get you to write this stuff.
I know it should be.
You're wasted here.
Tory strategist, couldn't I?
Well, according to the messages that come in every week, I get
exactly,
this.
Exactly. 4-day week is actually being pushed by Labour MPs as well. So it sounds like exactly the kind of cultural war issue.
The John Soper working week, as it's otherwise known. The John Soper Memorial Week.
Yes.
If he ever does fall.
Oh, very good. And you also don't want to talk, I think, about the failures behind Prevent. We had the Axel Ridabakana review last week. We're going to get the one into Sir David Amos published after Prime Minister's questions. There are the Prime Minister's meeting the families of the Nottingham victims as well today. So there are lots of calls for a wider public inquiry into the failings behind the government's Prevent programme. So I'm sure that he will probably get asked, if not by Kemi Badenoch, by a backbencher about one more he's going to do about that. Yvette Cooper, speaking to LBC last week on Call the Cabinet, did seem to suggest that some work was being done from the government behind the scenes on that one too.
You're listening to Sheila Fogarty or James O'Brien or Ian Dale or even Lewis Goodall here on LBC. And we're just who knows at this point. I'm not sure, Natasha.
We should get them to do a new tease for you.
Really confuse the listeners. That's perfect radio. We're just waiting for Prime Minister's questions to get underway, or for Kemi Badenoch, Leader of the Opposition, to get her feet, and we'll cross live to the House of Commons as soon as she does so. Think the Prime Minister will be grateful for a bit of recess? Natasha?
Yeah, I think he probably will. Although we are still, of course, waiting for that Donald Trump visit.
Indeed.
So he may
it would
use
be a
that.
perfect time, wouldn't it?
A good time for him to actually fly out of the country without facing too much criticism from people about that. The other topic that I thought might come up will be assisted dying. Obviously, Kemi Badenoch is fiercely against this. We've had Kim Leadbeater, who's pushing this through yesterday. She's arguing she's not watering down the assisted dying bill. Lots of her critics are now now getting incredibly jumpy. We know this is something that's personally supported by the Prime Minister. Kemi Badenoch might want to go in on why they're taking away those protections for High Court judges to have to sign this off. It does seem to be a very ferocious debate in politics, and we could therefore see the end of this bill if enough Labour MPs, I think if even 30 of them, decide to not vote for this bill when it does come for a next vote in the House of Commons, then it could completely fail and we could be waving goodbye to the idea of assisted dying for probably a generation, I imagine.
So we've sort of gone through 100 days or so, haven't we, with Kemi Badenoch? There's been quite a bit of sort of rumblings of discontent, not just her performances at Prime Minister's questions, but sort of in general in terms of her strategy.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's unfair to say she's not quite grasped Prime Minister's questions yet. Yeah. Every single week, I think she's definitely getting better, but I don't think she's ever landed a killer blow on the Prime Minister yet.
Obviously, and he's not exactly the most adroit himself at these things.
He's not fantastic at it, but he does have a lot more Commons experience than her, and obviously experience at the bar, in the dispatch box, making these arguments week in, week out. I think he is generally seen as an okay performer at Prime Minister's questions.
He's had a lot of experience. He's been in it for 4 years now.
But equally, I don't think he's quite landed. He does make a couple of good jokes. She makes a couple of good jokes back, but I don't think
he makes jokes. Right, we're going live to the House of Commons. Let's see if she does better.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative government established the Ukraine Family Scheme, and in total, over 200,000 Ukrainians, mostly women, children and the elderly, have found sanctuary in the UK from Putin's war. However, a family of 6 from Gaza have applied to live in Britain using this scheme, and a judge has now ruled in their favour. This is not what the scheme was designed to do. This decision is completely wrong. It cannot be allowed to stand. Is the government planning to appeal on any points of law? And if so, which ones?
Minister. Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. I do not agree with the decision. She's right. It's the wrong decision. She hasn't quite done her homework because the decision in question was taken under the last government, according to the legal framework of the last government. But, Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. It should be Parliament that makes the rules on immigration. It should be the government that makes the policy. That is the principle, and the Home Secretary is already looking at the legal loophole which we need to close in this particular case.
Mr. Speaker, he did not answer the question. If he plans to appeal, then the appeal may be unsuccessful and the law will need to be changed. And if he does not appeal, the law definitely will need to be changed. He talks about a decision made under the last government. It was not made by the last government, it was made by the courts. The issue we are discussing today is about judicial decisions. We cannot be in a situation where we allow enormous numbers of people to exploit our laws in this way. There are millions of people all around the world in terrible situations. We cannot help them all, and we certainly cannot bring them all here. Will he commit to bringing forward that new legislation or amending his borders bill?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, I've already said the Home Secretary has already got her team working on closing this loophole. We don't need to wait for that. We're getting on with that because we're taking control. They lost control of immigration. We had nearly 1 million people come into this country, had an open borders experiment. On a Monday of this week, they voted against increased powers to deal with those that are running the vile trade of people smuggling. Same old Tories, open borders, empty promises.
Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister was on top of his brief, perhaps he'd be able to answer some questions. Given this crazy decision and so many others, new legislation is needed to clarify the right to a family life in Article 8. I'm not talking about what he just said. I know Labour MPs don't understand much of what they're saying, but the Prime Minister literally wrote a book on the European Convention on Human Rights. This is a situation where we need to put our national interest before the ECHR. Does he agree that we should legislate even if lawyers warn that this might be incompatible with human rights law?
Prime Minister. She complains about scripted answers and questions. Her script doesn't allow her to listen to the answer.
Prime Minister.
She asked me if we're going to change the law and close the loophole in question 1. I said yes. She asked me again in question 2, and I said yes. She asked me again in question 3. It's still yes.
Mr. Speaker, he didn't listen to question 1. I asked if he would appeal the decision. He did not answer that. He's not listening. He's too busy defending the international human rights law framework. Mr. Speaker, this case has arisen because a Palestinian came to the UK from Gaza in 2007. He is now a British citizen. This is precisely why we need to break the conveyor belt from arriving in the UK to acquiring indefinite leave to remain, and then a British passport, and now a right to bring 6 family members here as well. Just last week, the Prime Minister bizarrely claimed that a British passport was not a pull factor for those coming to the UK. Will he now support our plans to toughen the process on indefinite leave to remain and make getting a British passport a privilege, not a right?
Prime Minister. Speaker, they presided over record high levels of immigration, reached nearly 1 million. It was a one-nation experiment in open borders. And she was the cheerleader. She was the one campaigning for more people to come and thanking her own side when they supported her campaign. So before she lectures us, I think she needs to reflect on her own record and her own record here.
Mr. Speaker, he is the Prime Minister now. The people out there want to know what he is going to do about the situation. He needs to spend less time whining about the last government and do his job. I thought, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister and I both agreed that Israel had a right to defend herself. Yet the judge in this case noted that the family were facing a humanitarian crisis, and I quote, as a consequence of the Israeli government's indiscriminate attempts to eliminate Hamas, and government lawyers accepted this. Is the Prime Minister allowing lawyers to change the position on Israel? And was this because of advice from the Attorney General? And if not, why on earth did government lawyers accept the argument that Israeli actions were indiscriminate?
Prime Minister. They put the complete opposite argument. She talks about on top of her breath. She has no idea what she's talking about. I'll tell her again. We need to change the law. That's why the Home Secretary is already closing the gap. I know the script doesn't allow any adaptation, but this is getting tedious.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has not read the judgment. I suggest that he does. There are very serious questions now. Being asked about the Attorney General, the Prime Minister's personal friend and donor. Even Labour ministers are concerned. One Labour peer, Lord Glassman, has called him the absolute archetype of an arrogant progressive fool. Yeah. If we are serious about protecting our borders, we need to make sure we appoint people who believe in our country and everything we stand for. It is not clear the Attorney General does. The government is now recruiting a new Chief Inspector of Borders who lives in Finland and wants to work from home. This is not serious. Why should the British public put up with this?
The individual in question was appointed in 2019 by the last government to a senior position. He then worked for 5 years from Finland. We've changed that, and he's now going to be working from the United Kingdom full-time. Finland under them. And she talks about the Attorney General. She sat round the cabinet table with an attorney who was later sacked for breaching national security.
Charlotte Nettles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Long-standing traders in the CPS Centre in Colchester were devastated to receive eviction notices, giving them just 28 days to vacate, entirely out of the blue and under spurious pretexts by the new owner, shell company Shivat Hananim Capital. So far, the owner and their legal representatives have failed to hear tenants' concerns and mine and to negotiate a way forward. So does the Prime Minister share my concerns at this situation, and will he set out our plans to protect independent businesses which are at the heart of our high street and communities?
Prime Minister.
Well, thank her for raising this, which is obviously of real concern to businesses in her constituency. We do, Mr Speaker, expect landlords to meet their obligations to make buildings safe, and we support robust enforcement action from the regulators if they fail to do so. I will make sure that she gets a meeting with the Minister to discuss what steps can be taken in the particular case to support the businesses that her constituents rely on.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. 80 years ago this week, the Allies began a pincer movement against German forces between the Ruhr and the Rhine. British and Canadian troops attacked from the north, Americans from the south. British, Canadian and American soldiers fighting shoulder to defeat fascists. 80 years on, President Trump seems to have forgotten all this. His tariffs against steel and aluminium will hit Canada the hardest and will also hit jobs and the cost of living in our country. So in reminding President Trump who America's true and long-standing friends and allies really are, will the Prime Minister also prepare a plan for tariffs in return, starting with tariffs on American electric cars?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, he's right to reference our history in the 80-year anniversary. And of course, we were fighting alongside the Americans, and that is amongst the reasons we have a special relationship. British steel is an essential part of our heartlands, and we will not abandon our skilled workforce. And it needs a level-headed assessment of the implications, which is what we're going through at the moment. But we will always put our national interest first and steelworkers first.
Sir Ed Davey.
Thank the Prime Minister for that reply, but it seems to me the way President Trump and his ally Musk are operating, they do need to hear strong measures and words from even their allies. And moving on to Ukraine, Mr Speaker, if Ukraine is forced to surrender its own sovereign territory to Russia, it will be the greatest betrayal of a European ally since Poland in 1945. But President Trump says Ukraine may end up Russian, and he wants American money back. I think we all fear where this could end and the dangerous implications for our defence and our security. So can the Prime Minister reassure this House that he and other European leaders have given sufficient support to President Zelensky so that he can't be bullied by Trump and Putin into accepting a deal that will effectively hand victory to Russia?
Prime Minister.
As he knows, I met President Zelensky in Kyiv just a few weeks ago at my 8th meeting. The position since the outbreak of this conflict has been a united position across the House of supporting Ukraine, and I was able to reiterate my position, which is we must put Ukraine in the strongest possible position. That matters now just as much as it mattered at the beginning of this conflict, the strongest possible position, and I did discuss with him what more we can do, what more our allies can do to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position.
Kim Leadbeat.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Well, we're coming out of Prime Minister's questions. You'll be relieved to hear. It's not always that the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, manages to articulate and speak on behalf of a nation. But when he said, this is getting tedious, for once, I think he finally did. We'll get the analysis of that, of whatever that was, after this. It's Lewis Goodall here on LBC. The time is 12:15.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Time is 12:17. Well, I've watched a lot of Prime Minister's questions in my time in the chamber and outside of it. And the weird thing about the sort of Starmer-Badenoch years, if it ends up running to years, which after performances like that I think becomes less and less likely, is, Natasha, I think it's almost as if it's this sort of slightly weird dance where they both just, instead of actually even, I mean, insofar as Prime Minister's questions is ever a debate about policy or even politics, it becomes very formalistic. They basically spend it accusing each other of not being entirely up to date or not understanding whatever it is that they're talking about, which more than anything makes it seem more futile than ever and very, very boring.
Yeah, and usually Keir Starmer could be accused of not answering the questions from Kemi Badenoch properly, but I think this time she probably couldn't say that, but decided to go ahead on her script anyway of, well, you're not answering the question, and him saying, you're not listening to my answers. It just feels like they're actually having two separate Prime Minister's questions sessions, doesn't it?
You haven't done your homework. No, you haven't done your homework.
No, you're not listening. No, you're not answering. No, you're not listening. And it just feels a little bit tedious. But I think this session, more than anything, showed to me that Keir Starmer is preparing incredibly well for Prime Minister's questions. He had an answer for absolutely everything that she threw at him, whether it was the Attorney General he threw back, you served with Suella Braverman, who of course had to resign when she was Attorney General over those security email that she used her own personal email and was accused of security breaches, whether it's about the Finland, the government's preferred case of the new borders chief who's working from Finland, Keir Starmer throwing it back, well, actually, it was under you guys that you signed off his appointment, and he's been working in Finland for 5 years. I'm taking him back to the UK. Or whether it was on this case that she led on that that's been leading the papers today about this family from Gaza who have been allowed to settle under the Ukraine scheme. And he has said that he will be changing the law to stop that from happening. He had an answer for absolutely everything and just kept hitting it back again and again and again. She could not land a single blow this week.
I mean, look, Prime Minister's questions, being leader of the opposition is tough. It's not easy. You've got the kind of, all the government benches against you. The Prime Minister has the last word. But as William Hague said about his time as leader of the opposition, Prime Minister's questions is actually one of the only things you've kind of got to do. I mean, it's actually one of the only constitutional roles you have. You've got a lot of time on your hands. You don't have to govern anything. You've got a lot of time to prepare for it in a way the Prime Minister doesn't. And it feels to me, we've seen enough of this. I don't know what you think, but it feels to me now as if we've kind of seen enough of this stuff that it's almost, for Badenoch, a bit of a parable of her being leader of the opposition overall, which is, it feels like she hasn't even really begun to articulate yet what is her primary critique of Starmer. What is the thing that she thinks is going to have most resonance? Because what she seems to tend to do is every week veer from subject to subject, from point of critique to point of critique, without really alighting upon anything in particular, apart from this very odd thing about the idea of his being ill-prepared. But one thing that you probably can't say about Starmer is that he might not be the most exciting person in the world, but he doesn't give off the vibes of being ill-prepared in a way that, say, someone like Boris Johnson might have done.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the one critique of him usually is that he doesn't answer the question. Today he was absolutely...
Or that he flip-flops, or that he's sort of all over the place.
There's no narrative to her. Her topic selection, I think, is generally very good. And I think, apart from migration, which I don't understand why she continued... Well, we do understand why she continues to go on migration, is because her party, the Reform Party, continued to pressure her on that, and she feels like she has to address that. It's the one policy topic that we know that she's actually set a policy on migration, that she's not set out any other policies. But she goes on topics, and I think generally they're not bad topics. She goes on the economy, she goes on the farming tax, she goes on Chagos, she goes on lots of things which she thinks that the Prime Minister is weak on. I think that's a good tactic, but she doesn't have an overarching strategy of narrative, of ideology, of what she's standing for, of what the Prime Minister is not standing for, to tie it all together. And you see little hints of it that come out sometimes, where she says things like, under Keir Starmer they're negotiating but it's not working, and things like that. But she needs to get, I think, a bit better at conveying what she's trying to actually say about the Prime Minister and about the government, and I don't think she's quite managed to knit all of that together yet.
I mean, the migration stuff from the Tories is I found astounding.
It's baffling. It's just not...
I think it is baffling, because although, I can see, as you say, obviously they've got political pressure to their right that they have to try and deal with. But the problem they've got is, it's even more problematic for them than it is for Labour. Because, I've done it on the Sunday show, lots of other people will do it. Of course, the obvious rejoinder each time is they say the government isn't getting a grip on migration. Obviously. Yeah. Obviously, the rejoinder is, well, hang on a minute. You had 14 years and it reached higher levels than ever before. And you know what their response to that is? And this is the bit that I find baffling. Their response to that is, we made a mistake. Made a mistake? What, you leave your bag on the train? That makes it sound almost accidental. Or, whoops, we
made a mistake and left the door open for a long time.
We've got we've got net migration at 700,000. Whoops, that was a mistake. Instead of doing actually what would be honest, which would be to say, well, look, actually, if you go back and you actually look at the situation at the time, we had COVID, we had inflation, we had a labour problem, we had Ukrainians coming in, we had Hong Kongers coming, and actually say, we didn't make a mistake, it was just, I don't think Keir Starmer would have made any different decisions at the time. We stick by our decision. At least, but now we have to get it down. At least that would make sense. But what they're basically just saying is, they basically just took complete leave of their senses, which doesn't say much about the judgment for a political leader.
It doesn't work. And, Keir Starmer's argument, he said this just a few minutes ago, same old Tories, open borders, empty promises. And that's exactly what people, I think, out there think about the Conservative Party at the moment. And the reason why they're not doing any better in the polls under Kemi Badenoch is because they just don't believe her. She has not managed to repair any of the trust that was lost over the last 14 years of this government slowly. And obviously, the horrible election result that they had last year, they still don't believe in her enough at all. They don't believe her. They don't trust her. They don't trust that she's actually going to do anything that she says, which is, the reason why the Tories say they've not put forward any policies, because they believe there's no point, because the party, the country doesn't actually trust them at the moment. But yeah, the idea of going in on migration, of course, it's something to hammer the government on, but I don't think it works when the Tories have left such a horrible record on it.
And we see I don't know if you saw this, there was a piece in the Telegraph overnight, late evening yesterday, talking about Badenoch's approach to the media, which is, might sound trivial, but actually, when you're leader of the opposition, it's basically nearly everything that you do, right? Or the thing that really sort of matters.
And this is her only chance once a week to get in front of us. Right?
Exactly, completely. So this is her chance to kind of make an impression that way. But apparently her office is saying that, they're trying to, they want to mirror, because she doesn't like doing the media. She finds media, irritating and tedious, and journalists irritating and tedious, and there might just be something in that, but it is it's like complaining about the weather if you're a politician. But she's apparently saying, her office is saying, that she wants to kind of emulate Trump in sort of doing kind of right-wing media podcasts, sort of appearing in non-traditional media spaces, because they think that's where she'll be at her best, when she can kind of talk at length, communicate her vision and so on. What do you make of that as a strategy in Britain?
I mean, it got her a very nice write-up after she did the Daily Telegraph
Weird
podcast.
That, isn't it?
Funny that.
Weird that.
But look, sometimes...
Shame no one listens.
Oh.
No, it's a joke. Sorry.
Sorry. Look, it depends who she's trying to reach out to. Is she trying to... And I still don't think Kemi Badenoch knows who she's trying to reach out to. Is she trying to win back those disaffected Tory voters? Is she trying to stop people from going to Reform? Or is she trying to win back Labour voters who, are disaffected with voting Labour? I don't think she quite knows that at the moment. I don't think there's a strategy in place. She, at the moment, talks a lot about her ideology, about her values, and she keeps harking back to that speech where she launched her leadership speech, where she was talking about the values she wanted the Conservative Party to emulate. But I still don't know exactly which group she's targeting. But I talked to people in the Labour Party, they knew exactly who they are targeting for the next election already. And I saw some internal slides that have been sent around in number 10 about the exact groups that they're looking at. And they are not too worried about, despite, Morgan McSweeney and the Reform idea that he's very concerned about that, those are not the people that they are worried that are going to slip back into Conservative voters. And they're more worried about shoring up votes from the other side of the political spectrum, worried about bleeding votes to the Lib Dems and the Greens. I don't think the Conservatives know exactly who they're targeting yet.
No, it's funny, isn't it? What do you think of this argument? We're hearing it more and more in the kind of sort of the right-wing media space. We heard Badenoch talk about it there. She is a sort of terminally online kind of politician.
Saying that, she doesn't use a lot of social media.
No, that's true. But I get the impression she reads a lot of it, but she doesn't do a lot of it, which I think is the kind of worst of all worlds, actually. But she's mentioned Lord Hermer, the Attorney General there, something, again, getting quite a lot of traction. Do you think that there's anything in that? Do you think there's much mileage in the attacks on Lord Hermer? Maybe just explain to people kind of why it is that people are going through.
So, Lord Hermer, the Attorney General, clearly getting a lot of criticism at the moment. There are clearly people in the Cabinet that are unhappy with the way that he is doing things. He's a close ally of Keir Starmer.
Old friend,
donor, lawyer, and they are clearly sort of two sides of the same coin. There's a lot of criticism that he in government is holding the government to a higher standard of strictness around the law, and that's hampering government decisions, according to a lot of people who've been briefing newspapers and other reports.
The knives are out for him, aren't they? It's
really, really so. Yeah. But he, I think, has been pretty forthright in coming forward to back him. Although he didn't say anything about him today. I believe he just sort of deflected and started talking about something else.
Slightly uncomfortable.
It is slightly uncomfortable for him, and I think if it'll get past off of just the nitty gritty day to day of Westminster politics for us, for politicos that are not inside of it, and go, who on earth is the Attorney General and what does he do? But
it's a big important job, though.
It's a big job. It has a big impact on decisions that go on internally in government and the direction of travel. But a lot of the criticism of Keir Starmer from Boris Johnson's government was that he did not believe in the rule of law enough. He did not push forward enough of what was considered considered to be the right rule of law and respect for international institutions. And that's when Keir Starmer is obviously going to come up against some trouble, because this ECHR case that Kemi Badenoch mentioned today usually would be the kind of thing where Keir Starmer would stand up and say, we have to obey by the rule of law. But actually, you get into government, you realise these cases, these lawyers, these tribunals are not quite straightforward. People don't all see the law in the same way. And people like Lord Hermer are getting criticised for being too strict on it. Equally, these immigration judges that have signed off this Gaza case, again, Keir Starmer is saying, well, actually, it's the opposite. I think there's a loophole in the law here, and I'm going to crack down on it.
And we are still waiting. We talked about it before we went to Prime Minister's questions. We are still waiting for this Trump visit, aren't we? I mean, if it goes on too much longer, there will be... I mean, to be fair, I don't think he's not received any European leaders yet.
No, we've had the King of Jordan and we've had the Israeli Prime Minister. It's not like President Macron's been over. They've been all buddy-buddying, which I don't think was going to happen anyway, because Keir Starmer not a fan of many European leaders, one may say. But yes, I think there are still a little bit of tentative thoughts in Downing Street and in Washington that this visit is going to go forward at some point in the next couple of weeks, but they are still trying to nail down a date.
But it is a moment of... I mean, it's peril if it doesn't happen, but it'll be a moment of political peril when it does happen, because, of course, you just can never, unlike, visiting Biden or anyone else, she basically runs like clockwork. You know exactly what's going to happen, what's going to be said. Who knows? Musk could be there. You could be surprised to see Elon coming into the Oval Office and, coming with his child. We're going to be talking about that shortly. But, it is actually a moment of unpredictability.
It is, but I think while the steel tariffs are up in the air, perhaps it's not the right time to have this visit anyway. I think, Keir Starmer would like to see that decision get out of the way first. However, it could be the fact that it could give Keir Starmer the opportunity to press him in person about why he doesn't believe that that's going to happen. In that case, Downing Street should get on with it and try and secure a date in the diary for that ASAP. Obviously, Peter Mandelson starting his job as our man in Washington this week. I'm sure we'll be pressing him hard. The government still, for what it's worth, Lewis, not taking the threat of tariffs. Dave, you tried to raise this today, saying that they should slap retaliatory tariffs on the Trump administration if they do it to us. The government here staying completely stum. Apparently they're still weighing it up, but I just don't think it's going to happen.
Well, also, according to Ed Davey, the people of the Ruhr Valley will be surprised to hear that Allied troops crossed over 7 years ago, back in 8 years ago, back in 2017. So, hey, it's all different in Lib Dem land.
Yes, exactly.
Natasha Clark there, LBC's political editor. We're going to have an update on what has been going on in Washington overnight and the extraordinary, astounding scenes. If you haven't seen it already, it's worth looking on X or wherever it happens to be, Blue Sky, of these pictures of Trump talking to the press, flanked alongside Elon Musk wearing a sort of Undertaker's coat and a black MAGA cap, just alongside him, talking to reporters almost like a co-president. And also, just at his knees, his own child, who I think is also called X. They're not weird, people. They're definitely not weird. It's all perfectly normal, don't worry. You're listening to Lewis Goodall here on LBC. We'll be crossing to Washington next. First at 12:31. Let's get the latest LBC news headlines with Amelia Cox.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 12:34. Well, from Westminster to Washington now, and every single day we wake up to the latest developments in Donald Trump's brain, or Elon Musk's brain. And yesterday we were treated to the astounding sight of President Trump answering questions from the Resolute desk in the Oval Office, flanked to his side by his political secretary to his left, but also to his right, Elon Musk, wearing a black Undertaker-type coat, a black MAGA cap, and just beneath him, scurrying around, his child. It was bizarre, it was surreal, even by the standards of MAGA-land. And various questions were put to the, in effect, co-equal presidents, including previous claims that Elon Musk had made, about condoms.
Mr. Musk, you said on X that an example of the fraud that you have cited was $50 million of condoms was sent to Gaza. But after fact-check this, it apparently Gaza in Mozambique, and the program was to protect them against HIV. So can you correct the statements? It wasn't sent to Hamas, actually. It was sent to Mozambique, which makes sense why condoms was sent there. Yeah. And how can we make sure that all the statements that you said were correct, so we can trust what you're saying?
Well, first of all, some of the things that I say will be incorrect and should be corrected. So nobody's going to bat 1,000. I mean, we will make mistakes, but we'll act quickly to correct any mistakes. I'm not sure we should be sending $50 million worth of condoms to anywhere, frankly. I'm not sure that's something Americans would be really excited about.
There's Elon Musk there, a man who certainly has never knowingly, with 12 children, used a condom, and certainly never knowingly much been bothered about whether or not he's telling the truth. You know, it doesn't matter, does it? Sometimes you don't get it or always get it right. You don't always get it right. I mean, it's fine, though. It's fine, because it's not as if he's got 230 million followers on his corrupted social media platform that he's spreading his lies and misinformation to on a regular basis, and everyone thinks it's completely fine and all right and normal. It's fine. Don't worry, everybody. But it's okay, because that wasn't all that was said in the Oval Office yesterday. Oh, no, we've got more. And we've got this response here to the president from a reporter, having to ask once again whether or not it is the case that the president's Gaza plan would include and involve forcible repatriation of the Gazans in the Gaza Strip.
Mr. President, you've said before that the U.S. would buy Gaza, and today you just said we're not going to buy Gaza.
We're not going to have to buy. We're going to have Gaza. We don't have to buy. There's nothing to buy. We will have Gaza.
What does that mean?
No reason to buy. There is nothing to buy. It's Gaza. It's a war-torn area. We're going to take it. We're going to hold it. We're going to cherish it. We're going to get it going eventually, where a lot of jobs are going to be created for the people in the Middle East. It's going to be for the people in the Middle East, but I think it could be a diamond. It could be an absolute tremendous asset for the Middle East, and you're going to have peace. It's going to bring peace in the Middle East.
We're going to hold it. We're going to cherish it. Sounds like Trump is going to marry Gaza, not buy it, marry Gaza. But the good news is that there was, as serious as all of that was, there was something even more important that the president wanted to get off his chest.
This has cost both the government and private industry an absolute ton of money and left consumers all over the country wildly dissatisfied with their straws. So we're asking aspects of the federal government, federal departments and agencies to look at their existing procurement processes, and we're asking your Domestic Policy Council to look holistically at this issue to address it, and it really is something that affects ordinary Americans in their everyday lives.
We're going back to plastic straws. These things don't work. I've had them many times, and on occasion they break, they explode. If something's hot, they don't last very long, like a matter of minutes, sometimes a matter of seconds. It's a ridiculous situation. So we're going back to plastic straws. I think it's okay.
On occasions they break, they explode. It's a ridiculous situation. Not talking about condoms there, fortunately enough. Instead, talking about plastic straws, the president. Important work that the 47th president of the United States has to conduct, has got to do, flanked by Elon Musk, making it clear what he thought about plastic straws. The most powerful office on the face of the earth. Let's catch up now with Simon Marks, LBC's Washington correspondent, of course. Simon, even by Trump standards, this was quite something to watch.
Yes, it's just worth picking up, Lewis, on the fact that they always seem terribly obsessed with explosive devices. The condoms that were allegedly going to Hamas, that President Trump said a couple of weeks ago he had stopped from being sent to Hamas. Nonetheless, at the time, he inexplicably claimed that Hamas had somehow got their hands on them and were using them to make bombs. I don't quite know how you do that. Now we discover that paper straws are potential explosive devices. I mean, I think what we witnessed yesterday was, frankly, the country going full Ruritania. I mean, if you've ever watched the Marx Brothers, no relation, Groucho Marx in Duck Soup, acting as the president of Freedonia. I mean, at least that's satirical. What we saw in the Oval Office yesterday was simply the most astonishing tableau anybody that has ever covered modern American politics has witnessed, and underscored the fact that Elon Musk now is acting essentially as the de facto prime minister in a country that doesn't have a prime minister, and in a country that doesn't have anything like Prime Minister's Question Time, where the Prime Minister would be held accountable by Parliament. He is absolutely unrestrained by Donald Trump, and we should explain that the ostensible reason why Elon Musk was in that room yesterday was because one of the executive orders that Donald Trump was signing was to empower Mr. Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, which of course is not a real government department, to pursue, as the executive order puts it, large-scale workforce reductions across the federal government. They're talking about, for every 4 civil servants that resign or are fired, they're only going to replace them with 1, And that one person has to be an absolute dyed-in-the-wool Make America Great Again loyalist. So this executive order substantially expands Elon Musk's capacity to oversee hiring at federal agencies. Mr. Musk made a whole slew of absolutely unsubstantiated claims about the fraud that he says he is uncovering throughout the federal government. Donald Trump said that the total amount of fraud within the federal government may even top $1 trillion by the time Mr. Musk is finished. They talked together about kickbacks that they claimed figures that the U.S. Agency for International Development had received as a result of dispersing the now, I think it's fair to say, former humanitarian development assistance organization's budget. I mean, the elephant in the room was the fact that when Donald Trump was president first time around, every foreign delegation that arrived in Washington, D.C. dutifully booked into the Trump Hotel in the center of Washington, D.C. White House events were organized at Mar-a-Lago at the president's private residences and paid for with taxpayer money. And they're sitting there talking about kickbacks at the U.S. Agency for International Development. The other astonishing aspect about that press conference yesterday, Lewis, was the questions that were not asked. And I think it's really important to underscore what's taken place within the White House press corps over the last 3 weeks. A large number of far-right pro-Trump news organizations have suddenly been afforded room at the White House, and what the White House relentlessly refers to as legacy media institutions are being derailed. So yesterday, the Associated Press White House reporter was denied access to that event in the Oval Office because the Associated Press, the nation's most respected wire service, is refusing to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America.
Astounding.
So when you watch that press availability take place, and there were some serious-minded journalists in that room who did a shameful job yesterday. At no point did anybody think that they needed to ask Elon Musk if he's abiding by the court order that limits his access to the Treasury's payment systems. Has he destroyed all of the private and confidential records, including millions of Social Security numbers that his team of cyber whiz kids was able to access through the Treasury's payment systems over a week ago? He stood there railing Mr. Musk about the power of unelected bureaucrats.
Who elected you, pal?
Not a single reporter made the point that nobody elected him. He insisted that he was practicing maximum transparency because he was telling everybody what he was doing over X, his own social media platform. Nobody asked either Musk or Trump on what authority they had closed the U.S. Agency for International Development, an agency that is congressionally funded and reports to Congress. And I mean, most astonishingly, I thought, nobody asked him what the kid was doing in the Oval Office. What was this child doing in an... I mean, it's like, how is this possible? No one asked him about the kid.
Yeah. It is mind-boggling, isn't it, Simon? It's sort of it's sort of hard, it's head-spinning. And meanwhile, given all of this is happening, you would expect, of course, in terms of the US Constitution, one of the branches of government which was supposed to be a check and balance on an executive which is out of control. The founding fathers had thought about this. They had considered the idea of having a president. They were accustomed to a head of state that they thought was behaving improperly. That was King George III. They designed a constitutional framework to make sure that there were checks and balances. One of them is the Congress, the legislative branch, which is actually the first branch of government, as outlined in Article 1. And yet House Speaker Mike Johnson has said that he agrees wholeheartedly that the Trump administration can make sweeping cuts to federal spending without their approval, which is taking a position which is completely at odds with the Constitution's separation of powers and undercuts his own branch of government.
Correct. And there are two things that are taking place here simultaneously. First of all, Elon Musk and others are engaged in state capture. They are taking control of government departments and government agencies in a bid partly to aggrandize power and substantially to enrich themselves, because the less regulation, the less oversight there is of their own industries and their own federal contracts that their private businesses enjoy, the better it is for them. The other thing that's taking place here is, beyond anything that we've seen before, an assertion of an all-powerful executive. I mean, we thought, Dick Cheney back in the day was the evil Rasputin to George W. Bush's efforts to try and push the powers of the presidency. This is now becoming a conversation about whether there are any restraints whatsoever on presidential power. The president's lawyer, Alina Haber, yesterday, she now has some kind of role at the White House. I think she's one of his legal counsel members at the White House, was advancing the argument that separation of powers actually does not amount to co-equal branches of government. The legislative, Congress, the judiciary, the Supreme Court, and the executive, the presidency. She says nothing can touch the power of the presidency. The presidency is far and away the most important of the three. Now, that is simply not the case, and it's all written down in black and white in the United States Constitution, over which these people are now riding roughshod. And every single guardrail so far has failed. Congress completely supine. Republicans controlling both chambers of Congress. Barely a murmur from Congress about what is taking place here at the moment on the Republican side. From the Fourth Estate, the press, total failure yesterday, and not just yesterday, continuing failure over the last 3 weeks, properly to articulate the nature of what is taking place here to the American people. And then the big question, and we talked about this earlier in the week, is the judiciary. Are these legal judgments that already Donald Trump is flouting, are they going to hold? Now, he said yesterday he always observes court orders, and he repeated that a couple of times during the course of this press availability. But even in that press availability, both he and Elon Musk went on the offensive against the judiciary, said that it was inconceivable that if you showed a judge that fraud was being committed on a grand scale at the US Agency for International Development, he could possibly argue that you didn't have the right to gut it and halt its operations. So the real question remains today, are we heading rapidly to a point where this government is simply going to ignore court orders? And if it does, it's very hard to see, given that the president has that immunity from prosecution opinion by the Supreme Court for anything that he does within his official actions. It's very hard to see how America, as we have known it throughout our lives, survives.
But just finally and briefly, Simon, it is worth saying that actually, up to now at least, the president is enjoying pretty robust approval numbers, much better than his first term.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but that's partly, of course, because people are being misinformed by his administration. I mean, they claim they're going to save $1 trillion by identifying fraud in the federal government. We haven't seen a single piece of paper that stands that claim up. I mean, the Gaza thing was a bit of bold swashbuckling. It's been rejected by the entire world apart from Israel. But people quite like this notion that, you can wave a magic wand at Gaza and solve the problem, even if it means dispossessing 2 million Palestinians of their homes. I mean, we've seen it in other areas. So there is a huge gulf now between what people are hearing from the White House, hearing from MAGA, hearing from Republicans, and what is actual reality. And without the checks and balances and the guardrails, we're going full Bolsonaro, full Viktor Orban. We're going Ruritania.
Simon Marks there, LBC's Washington correspondent. Developments from the American capital become more astounding by the day, by the hour, by the minute. We'll keep you up to date, of course, as always, on LBC. The time is 12:50.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Time is 12:53. Never let it be said that the lot of a political journalist on LBC is not a deeply glamorous one, because we sent Aggie Chamber to a speech by the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood. Lucky lady, and she's back to tell us all about it. What she had to say, Aggie?
I have been all the way to the London Probation headquarters and back.
One of my favourite bits of London.
Well, indeed, Southwark, lovely place. Yeah. But it is genuinely fascinating. She was talking about the probation service, as you might imagine, the fact that she was at the London probation headquarters. Yep. But it is intimately linked with prison numbers, which, as you know, are much too high. That's something this government is trying to tackle. Indeed, previous administrations have tried to tackle too. And you cannot sort out prison numbers without sorting out probation. So Shabana Mahmood today talked about a number of measures that she is going to announce to try and sort that out. Number one, they're going to cancel 13,000 courses, rehabilitation courses. They're going to add new probation officers, and they're going to introduce new technology to stop staff drowning in paperwork. But she began this speech, as many speeches from this government begin, by criticising the previous government.
In 2010, the axe of austerity swung. Ideology trumped evidence, and probation suffered the consequences. The most devastating blow was dealt in 2014 when the service was split. Part remained in the public sector, managing the highest risk offenders, and the rest was hived off to be run by the private sector, who would supervise those of low and medium risk. Like all bad ideas, the approach was deceptively simple and wrong.
Now, this, she is referencing the part privatisation of the probation service done in 2014 by Chris Grayling, now Lord Grayling, when he was Justice Secretary. This has been pretty widely criticised, including by the National Audit Office, who said in 2019 that at least £171 million was wasted on that, and the plans were later reversed. So she started by talking about that, and I think when you talk to stakeholders within the justice sector, they do say that that was a really problematic thing, and the probation service basically hasn't really recovered from that. So to try and turn the probation service around, she also announced this.
As I have shown already in this job, I believe in confronting problems, not pretending they are not there. And so from today, we will cancel courses for those who pose a low risk to society. This will end the last government's pretense that these courses were ever going to be delivered. We will ensure those offenders who pose a higher risk and who need to receive these courses will do so.
So what are those courses? Well, it's not completely clear, wasn't completely clear from her speech, wasn't completely clear from the briefing afterwards. But essentially, these are courses that over the last 3 years, 13,000 offenders did not complete. And they didn't complete them basically because of geography, because they just didn't get round to it, because of the impossible workload from the probation service. So what she's essentially saying is these courses that already didn't happen, they're still not going to happen. But instead of not happening because of geography, they're not going to happen now because we're going to target them towards the high-risk offenders rather than the low-risk offenders. So that was one of the big announcements today, and as I mentioned already, announcing that they're going to recruit 1,300 new probation officers. They'd already announced 1,000 to be recruited by this March, and introducing this new technology to stop staff drowning in paperwork, essentially so they can spend more time with offenders. But I asked the Chief Executive Officer of the Howard League for Penal Reform, who was in the audience, if she felt these measures were enough.
No, I mean, I don't think it's anywhere near enough. You need to. There needs to be much more significant investment in probation. I mean, probation officers are down, I think, 33% on where they were kind of 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So to add another 1,300 people, it sort of doesn't touch the sides of the number of people who are required to be in the probation service, and those people need better support.
She also talked about her disappointment that there wasn't more focus on risk, advise, befriend and assist, which was something that was the kind of mantra until the late 90s of the probation service. Instead, now it's much more focused on risk. And she said that's why a lot of people don't actually want to enter the probation service. But when I asked her what she'd give this government out of 10 for their justice policy so far, she said they weren't ready to be graded yet, but sounded like they needed a bit more help in some areas.
Well, she talked to the Education Secretary. She's very much against one-word assessments, as we know. Just finally, but I know you didn't see PMQs, Aggie, because you were at this speech. But as you can see on Twitter already, a lot of, it looks like the Tory benches are really unhappy. Looked really unhappy in the chamber, really unhappy with Badenoch's performance. I think, by common consent, I think the Westminster consensus, at least, it was her worst performance yet as PMQs. Do you think she's, that it's conceivable that the way it's going that she could be in trouble?
Well, when I speak to people around her, they say, no, she needs more time. But then other people say, someone who used to work in Number 10, for example, said, they're going to get rid of her quickly. I thought it was striking. Dominic Cummings said over the weekend, of course, formerly of Boris Johnson fame, that he thought she would go quickly. But then another Tory watcher said to me that he thought that the Tories might overcorrect because they've had so much psychodrama over the last few years. Perhaps they'll actually just think, OK, we'll stick with this leader and see what happens.
No matter what happens next. Well, Aggie Chamber there, LBC's political correspondent, finishing us for the day. If you missed any of today's show, you can of course listen and catch up on Global Player, and you can use it to listen to a wide range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, the best bits of this show in 60 minutes every day, even whilst James is away. At some point we might have to rename it the way it's going. Now, download now for free from your app store. You won't like that. Or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Thomas Warburg, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
Are we sure about that?
James O'Brien on LBC.